Black Myth Wukong has so many unique, interesting bosses for you to fight, and unless you're familiar with the original Journey to the West, you may not realize just how deep the subtext and lore lies for all of them, with over 200 journal entries to read, as well as so much hidden content across the game's 6 chapters. Piecing together how it all connects is no easy feat. But in this video, we're taking a detailed look specifically at the main and secret main bosses of Black Myth Wukong. Inevitably, with the story as interconnected as it is, we will touch on many more than just these main 12, but I'll be keeping the focus mainly on them for this video. If you want more detailed lore and tangents on some of the other bosses too, then check out the other videos I've done on this game afterwards. But now, let's get into it. We begin, of course, with the prologue, and honestly, this whole scene is only going to make complete sense at the end of the game, and this video, to be fair. The game's got this wonderful cyclical narrative going on, but for initial context, this is of course Sun Wukong, the mischievous stone monkey hero of Journey to the West. Originally born from a stone, Wukong would grow up alongside a group of other monkeys, eventually becoming their king. After this, he meets a mentor named Puti Zushi, who helps him develop an insane array of supernatural powers, things we of course also get to use throughout the game. As Wukong's power grew, he'd go on to meet the Dragon King, Yaoguais, and obtain his armor as well as his famous staff, the Jingubang. Though this extortion of the Dragon King angers the heavens, who attempt to punish Sun Wukong, only to find him literally too powerful to do anything about. It takes the power of the actual Buddha, who's finally had enough after Wukong takes a piss on his hand, to stop him. Wukong is cast down and imprisoned under a mountain for 500 years as recompense. Eventually, he's freed, though now has a crown placed on his head, capable of shrinking and causing him excruciating pain in order to keep his mischief under control. He then joins the monk Tan Sangzang, his white dragon horse, Zubajie, and Sha Wujing on the journey to the west to retrieve the Buddhist scriptures. That journey is mirrored and harkened back to a lot as we go through the game, so we'll be touching on it a lot more throughout this video. But back to the opening scene, and this takes place after the journey to the west is over. Sun Wukong has achieved the title of victorious fighting Buddha and ascended to Buddhahood itself. That's how the original story of Journey to the West ended. But in this game, Sun Wukong, despite having achieved the height of power, is still subject to the whims of the Celestial Court, having to report to them despite now just wanting the freedom to live in peace on his mountain. So, being the mischievous, free-spirited, and free-minded monkey that he is, Wukong does what he wants to do and leaves. And so, Erlang Shen and the 4 heavenly kings come with an army to bring him back. And since Sun Wukong is literally one of the most powerful beings ever at this point, and beyond their power to kill, their plan is instead to kill his kind and level his mountain. So, who is Erlang Shen? Well, he is the nephew of the Jade Emperor and another sacred divinity, whose hallmark features are a 3rd truth-seeing eye and a 3-pronged spear, which contrasts with Wukong's staff. Now, in Journey to the West, Erlang is sent in to fight Sun Wukong after he trashes the Celestial Court. The two find that alone, they're both evenly matched, and it takes the help of other gods, as well as Erlang's dog, to finally subdue Sun Wukong. That's why this line in the prologue is really quite the provocation for Sun Wukong.
Look, monkey, I don't make a habit of fighting someone I've bested before.
So, as you know, this epic battle in the sky ensues, only coming to an end because that crown, placed by the Buddha, is still attached to Wukong's head. It incapacitates him and allows Erlang to do this. Crashing into Mount Huaguo, Sun Wukong, the great sage, has his body returned to the stone shell from whence it came, though his spirit, the aspects of his power, are divided into 6 relics, representative of eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and finally mind. These fall into the hands of various Yaoguais kings, and years later, another monkey, known as the Destined One, will hear this tale, before embarking on their own journey to obtain the 6 relics of Sun Wukong, return them to Mount Huaguo, and allow Sun Wukong to rise again. And it is those 6 Yaoguais kings who we'll mainly be focusing on for this video. Now, if you're finding, when playing this beautiful and demanding game though, that this keeps happening, then perhaps it's time to trade out your PC for something a little better. So I've partnered up with Apex Gaming PCs to offer you 3 new builds at varying price points and levels of power, with both the Apex Streamer and Streamer Plus hitting well within Wukong's recommended specs and all those wonderful details. Or for a nice entry-level PC, you can also check out the Apex Bronze. There's monthly financing for each of them if you're on a budget, as well as easily interchangeable component options. And for a full 10% off on top of that, don't forget to apply my code SAM when purchasing your brand new PC. Or, until the end of September, instead using the code WeLoveOurPartners will get you an even nicer 20% off. So, now that we're all liberated from those tragic FPS drops, let's get back to the main bosses. Chapter 1 brings us to the woodland region both in and around the Guanyin Temple, a place mostly dominated by wolf guais and a few snakes as well. Guais essentially being anything non-human in this game, so basically most of the characters and enemies. The 2 main bosses of this region are the Black Bear Guai, or Blackwind King in his human form, and the secret boss, monk, white thing, Elder Jinchi. These 2 characters have a long history together, so let's go back to the beginning, which ironically is mostly explained in the animated cutscene at the end of the chapter. As a young boy, hundreds of years before even the journey to the west took place, Jinchi met the Black Bear Guai when wandering in the woods, where the Guai gifted Jinchi with a sack of coins and jewels. From that moment on, Jinchi's impressionable young mind had been exposed to the concepts of greed and materialism, qualities the Black Bear Guai would also demonstrate in his own kingdom, where he and his followers amassed numerous treasures. The king routinely took tribute in his land, but in fairness did also redistribute much of that wealth among his followers, often in the form of magical, power-enhancing pills. The first boss that we fight, in fact, the Bull Guard, is a particularly devout disciple of the Bear Guais, who consumes his pills with a ritualistic reverence. The other Guais, in fact, took to believing that his pills were better, yet found that when they took them, they grew no additional strength themselves. So, Bull Guard's blind belief in the pill's total power possibly then contributes to his immense size and strength via a placebo effect. He believes that they'll make him powerful, and becomes powerful as a result. The same concept, in fact, as seen in Kung Fu Panda 1.
The scroll has given him power!
Back to Elder Jinchi though, and since his first meeting with the Black Bear Guai, the 2 maintained a continued correspondence. Jinchi went on to study at the Guanyin Temple, a place named for Bodhisattva Guanyin, who'll come up much more again later. Jinchi's friendship with the Black Bear Guai gave him access to Buddhist spells, which prolonged his life for an incredible 270 years. At some point during this, Jinchi buried his gold and jewels, allegedly quelling his lust for gold, which of course is a core part of becoming a Buddhist monk and surrendering all worldly ties. But the greed introduced by the Black Bear Guai was not so easily stowed. You see, the robes of monks, called kasayas, are very often the only worldly possession that a monk is permitted to own. After all, they still need clothes for warmth and other obvious reasons. But Jinchi, seeing that kasayas were still okay for a monk to possess, used them almost as an outlet for his materialistic qualities. Now, I don't know whether this scene is meant to be taken literally, or whether all these things were simply taken by the temple as tributes, but eventually Elder Jinchi has amassed 12 cases of kasayas, and luxurious ones too. And when Sun Wukong came to the Guanyin Temple with his master Tang Sanzang quite early on their journey, it was noted just how richly adorned Jinchi's monks were, kitted out in the finest new kasayas each and all. Before we get on to that part of the tale though, we need to briefly touch on 2 disciples of Jinchi. Guangji was a wolf guai who longed so desperately to be human, and whilst his teachings enabled him to shapeshift into one, the other humans saw straight through the guys, saying that though he looked like them, he had no idea how to actually act human. Guangji realized that in order to pass as fully human, he'd have to spend more time amongst them. So he went to his wolf master, called Lingjuzi, and begged for the opportunity. opportunity. Lingzhuzi was a key disciple friend of the Black Wind King and asked him to transform Guangxi into a young monk to go and train under his friend Jinchi, which he did. Still acting different initially though, of course, Guangxi was bullied by the other monks, leading Jinchi to kindly give him the name Guangxi, meaning the Great Wisdom, hoping that it would make such a name become true. Meanwhile, the Master of Snakes, White Snake Guai, became afraid that Lingzhuzi had sent Guangxi to Elder Jinchi in order to get one up with their king. So, to account for this, the snakes sent a disciple of their own, a much more ambitious Snake Guai who aspired to become a legend, named Guangmu. He was sent to Jinchi's Guanyin temple with one instruction: do not fall behind, least of all behind Guangxi. Yet, try as he might, the disguised Snake Guai could not garner more favor than his wolf counterparts. If you ask me, Guangxi's true and genuine desire to become human was a passion that just couldn't be matched by Guangmu's directionless desire for glory. Though these two disciples would remain soft rivals throughout their time at the Guanyin temple, a fact which ultimately would ignite its destruction. Tang Sangzang faced 81 trials during Journey to the West, and his arrival at Guanyin temple would mark the 11th. As the monk and his monkey disciple met with these other monks in the courtyard, Sun Wukong immediately saw through their richly adorned clothes, calling them sickly and weak, and asking if they'd broken their precepts.
Attachment to the material is detachment from the spiritual.
Indeed, the way Jinchi had exploited the rules to continue to pursue the material wasn't fooling the Monkey King. And when sitting down for tea with Elder Jinchi, the monk asked another particularly un-monk-like question, that being if the two had any treasures they could let him glimpse. Hearing this, Sun Wukong brought up his master's Kasaya, the Kasaya of Eversparks, a gift from Bodhisattva Guanyin herself, and thus very much a treasure. And after 270 years convincing himself that Kasayas were fair game to covet, there perhaps couldn't have been anything more tempting. Wukong pushed and prodded his master to show it off, until Tang Sangzang reluctantly did so. Now, Jinchi loved this thing, like to an unhealthy degree, all his centuries of abstinence bursting at the seams over the idea of possessing this one Kasaya, and he couldn't resist. He begged to inspect it further and hold on to it for that night. Sun Wukong again convinced his master to allow this, promising that if anything went awry that he would handle it. And yeah, he really delivered on that promise. See, Guangxi, the favorite and wolf disciple of Jinchi's, saw the desire in his master's eyes, and grateful for everything Jinchi had done for him, he sort of benevolently hatched a plan to permanently steal this thing for his master. But Guangmu, his ever-bitter rival, upon hearing this, decided he'd do one better and ensure he didn't fall behind. He realized that if Tang Sangzang was, tragically burned to death, he wouldn't even come asking for the Kasaya again the next day, allowing Jinchi to keep it. So he planned to burn Tang Sangzang and Sun Wukong whilst they slept. But being the ever-attentive monkey that he was, Sun Wukong sussed this whole thing out and saved his master, borrowing the fireproof mantle, a relic of Virupaxa, one of the 4 heavenly kings, and using it to cover himself and Tang Sangzang. But having no shortage of malice himself, Sun Wukong then took revenge, turning the fire back on the rest of the temple and burning it to the ground. Amidst this chaos, several things happened. Firstly, the Black Bear Guai came to the burning temple and, also enamored by the Kasaya of Eversparks, stole it for himself. Sun Wukong would eventually track him down with the help of Bodhisattva Guanyin, and the Black Bear King would be forced into her service, being made to don an encaging band just like the one Sun Wukong wears. Meanwhile, after the fire, Elder Jinchi couldn't live with his own failure, realizing that his weakness had ultimately set in motion the temple's destruction. So he then decided to stop living for a bit, or permanently, as he thought at the time. Guangxi was grief-stricken also, blaming himself for the plan to seize the Kasaya in the first place, gazing out at the death and destruction, probably proclaiming,
"What have I done?"
And he retreated into the mountains, further reflecting on Jinchi's teachings and fashioning a weapon inspired by that fire, the Red Tides. Though, all the while, he would still hear his name called through the mountains. Guangmu, who really did, in every sense of the word, light the spark of this whole tragedy, seemed to come off the least bad. He had, after all, put his plan into motion, ultimately to his own gain, and even with the temple's destruction, he was now free to just seek out his glory elsewhere. elsewhere. Finally, we also have to mention Lingzhuzi. No, not that one. I'll explain. The old wolf leader was also eventually killed by Sun Wukong as part of this whole ordeal. At least he was killed for now. And for the next 100 or so years, this is how things sat. The monkey and the monk continued on the journey with the rest, and Guanyin Temple was left, until one day, when a much wider plot was hatched, with details we'll touch on later into the video. But it was all precluded by the Black Bear Guai, still in Bodhisattva Guanyin's realm, receiving a visit from the Long Princess and Red Boy. Red Boy is a character we'll touch on again much later in Chapter 5. Black Bear's task now involved having his encaging headband removed and returning to Blackwind Mountain, where he would restore his power, winning back both the awe and loyalty of those who dwelt in his former abode. Fortunately, he didn't have to do this alone. For starters, he gained a new disciple, this white-clad noble, sent to this realm by his so-called brother, though his true purpose is part again of a far greater plot, which we'll get to a lot later. But also, Bodhisattva Guanyin had taught the Black Bear Guai the mantra of revival, which I think involves using the Eyes of Wukong, which was the relic that had fallen into the Black Bear's possession. And the first thing he did was resurrect the old wolf leader, Lingzhuzi. Firstly, because Lingzhuzi had been the Black Bear's friend, and possibly second, in the hope he would re-inspire loyalty from the other wolves. Though this did involve using the vessels of other loyal wolf guais who had to willingly sacrifice themselves to bring Lingzhuzi back. After returning to life, old Lingzhuzi sipped tea with the white-clad noble and pondered with him on whether his return was part of a grander scheme, to which the white-clad noble assures him that it really wasn't. It was simply the Black Bear Guai wanting an old friend back. Though, since Lingzhuzi's return had involved the deaths of his fellows, he could not keep living with that fact. So, venturing down the secret path next to where the white-clad noble is based, he once again embraces death. And whether the Blackwind King knew of Lingzhuzi's ultimate fate or not, he was again bereft of a wolf general. And so, he plucked another wolf, this time an exile from another land, who pinned a far greater focus on strength and skill than old Lingzhuzi's more spiritual demeanor. The Black Bear then made this wolf Lingzhuzi's replacement, both in rank and even name. So let's just call him Lingzhuzi 2.0. Though, understandably pissed off at this, the old wolf guais loyal to the first Lingzhuzi plotted to revolt. Lingzhuzi 2.0 did not take kindly to this, and would have devoured them all if not for the intervention of Guangji, who'd now returned from the mountains and presumably couldn't bear to see any more death. He held off Lingzhuzi 2.0 and gave the other wolves time to flee, and thus those we encounter in the earlier region of this chapter before entering the temple grounds, as well as Guangji himself, are all in fact exiles, loyal to the old Lingzhuzi. Though no doubt still feeling a little lonely at this point and frustrated, the Blackwind King decided to bring back his other old best friend, Elder Jinchi. And again, the revival went horribly wrong. Jinchi's inability to resolve his greed in life resulted in his returning spirit ignoring the corpse prepared for him and instead fusing with the gold, silver, and copper coins that the monk had buried in life, resulting in this monstrous golem. Perhaps even two golems, in a sense. The mindless, wandering white husk found earlier on near Guangzhe, and the actual still talking Elder Jinchi found in the secret Guanyin Temple after ringing all three of the bells. Though I think this is more of a spiritual realm that we enter here, or possibly just another point in the past where Jinchi and his disciples are forced to wander aimlessly, all removed from the land of the living. After all, this same courtyard is a place we already fought Lingzhuzi 2.0 earlier on in the chronology of us playing through the chapter. But Jinchi's spirit is still obsessed with treasures, and especially the Kasaya of Eversparks.
Disciples come, I hear travelers approaching my temple carrying new treasures. I cannot see you, but I recognize your odor. It cannot be you. You are back? It must be you who took that Kasaya. Now give it back!
And I think the true meaning behind this fight is really just to beat some sense into this corrupted spirit, since by the end of the fight, he does actually seem to manage to let go of the Kasaya he covets in this heartbreaking scene.
270 years spent. Kasayas collected by the hundreds. Still one short without his soul. No, stop. Go. The Kasaya, leave it. Just leave it. Stop the fire. Please.
It's not entirely clear how long Jinchi had been trapped like this, reliving that same tragedy over and over again, just wishing that he'd actually said and done those things. But thanks to us, his soul is finally freed. And I think the summary at the end of the chapter sums up his tale fairly well.
Centuries of devotion undone by a moment's greed. In the end, a lost soul became him. How pathetic.
Though Jinchi isn't solely to blame for his downfall. His disciples, after all, egged him on, and even the Black Bear Guai sowed the seeds for all of this hundreds of years prior. I think the real moment of ultimate weakness for Jinchi himself was in asking to see any treasures in the first place. Perhaps if he'd never set eyes on the Kasaya, then none of this would have happened. Though this ethos is actually touched on later by the Black Bear Guai, where we come to face him.
He once told me, out of sight, out of mind is a fool's task. Seeing but seeing through is what wise men do. But didn't he turn mad by what he saw
I think this speaks to the idea that Jinchi, concealing his greed, putting it under the guises of things he was kind of allowed to covet, clearly didn't work. In the end, what he really needed to see was the shallowness of his material greed. And yet, apart from maybe at the end of his fight a little bit, he never did see that. That just leaves the ultimate fate of the Blackwind King for this chapter, whom we'll fight twice on our ascension up the mountain. First in human form, which results in him transforming to a black wind, and finally in his true form of a Black Bear Guai, with the power of the relic overlooking us housed up at the top of a pagoda. And initially, upon his defeat, the Black Bear Guai attempts to flee with the relic, though when that fails and he's left at our mercy, he really begs for his life, explaining that he was merely a pawn in a far greater ploy by the Celestial Courts, and that he had no hope of ever properly unlocking the relic's power or using it, and could merely display it up here to once again obtain offerings from other Guais, just as he did in the times of old. Following his defeat, the Black Bear Guai promises to return to Bodhisattva Guanyin, don the encaging band once again, and resume his duties there. And whatever this plot he was part of was, he definitely didn't want to die over it. So that about sums up chapter 1 for now, and as I alluded to, there are many wider underlying plots being established here, which we'll be revisiting later on as we go through the video. But for now, it's on to chapter 2. This chapter revolves mostly around rats, cats, and stone Guais, with our main focus being the Yellow Wind Sage Rat Guai. But, as usual, for full context, we have to go back to before his part in the tale. Long ago, in the desert, there was the ancient kingdom of Sahali, ruled by a king and his 3 princes. But the sun was so strong in this desert that it could boil the sands, and would, by evening, create a hissing sound powerful enough to kill children in their cradles. So, in order to save them from this horrific fate, the Buddha gifted the kingdom with a drum, known as the Drum of the Setting Sun, which when sounded would neutralize the deadly hiss. After this, the kingdom flourished, and built huge golden Buddha statues in both thanks and reverence. Though, jealous of seeing the Buddha attain more adoration than himself, the king of Flowing Sands outlawed Buddhism from his land, razing the temples, banishing the monks, and even renaming the kingdom of Sahali to the Kingdom of Flowing Sands. Though, not long after this happened, one evening evening, when the drum was struck as usual, it summoned from the sands a ginormous beetle called a fuban, which ravaged the surrounding villages and slew many people. The beetle was literally drawn by the very sound of the drum that had been gifted from the Buddha, a tool that the kingdom of course had to use but now couldn't without also summoning the fuban. The timing of this event of course was no coincidence. You see, this beetle bore on its back a stone Buddha head, which will be recurring artifacts throughout the chapter, signifying the direct intervention of the Buddha, or more specifically, a bodhisattva named Lingji. And bodhisattvas, by the way, if I didn't mention, are beings that have attained Buddhahood, yet remain with an influence in the mortal realm. And this bodhisattva Lingji serves as the supreme power of this land, strongly believing in an adherence to a natural hierarchy of things, summed up when he says this:
Men, beasts, Buddhas, Yaoguais. Each of them bears a distinct root from birth, superior and inferior. None should disturb what's decided. Am I right, Sun Wukong?
So, when the king of Flowing Sands tried to steal his people's reverence for the Buddha, I think Lingji grafted a piece of himself to this beetle, bestowing it with power and making it his mount. You'll notice the Buddha stone heads and his actual head share all of the same hallmark features. The king of Flowing Sands and his people fought desperately against the fuban, and whilst characters like the first prince of Flowing Sands were valiant in their efforts, the best they could do was temporarily drive off the beetle. That is, until the arrival of this giant rat Guai called Yellowwind Sage, and his tiger companion, the Tiger Vanguard. The Yellowwind Sage had originated from Mount Lingshan as a yellow marten, but had developed sentience over the years after stealing the mountain's lamp oil. He also then develops the powerful ability to manipulate wind, which he called his Samadhi Wind, though, and especially in the lore of this game, Bodhisattva Lingji already had a counter to protect his beetle from this as well, for within his mounted head was contained the Wind Tamer vessel, the natural foil of the Samadhi Wind. But with a lot of help from a mysterious monkey from the future, it turns out, who was able to seize this vessel, the monkey and the sage finally fought the fuban beetle and defeated it. The monkey then vanished as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving the rat Guai to reap all the glory. And whilst his true intentions may have been to source a portion of the Bodhisattva's power for himself, the people of these lands simply saw him as a savior. The king of Flowing Sands, then eternally grateful, named the rat as his royal Yellowwind Sage. And from that day forth, the rat became the king's object of reverence. His counsel was respected above all others. And so, when the Yellowwind Sage suggested that the king grant full citizenship status to any rat Guais as wanted to come to these lands, the king of course obliged in an act known as the Rodent Reverence Edict. Though the first prince of Flowing Sands, who as I mentioned had fought valiantly as well, was a little pissed off at having his glory stolen by the sage. After all, the only title he'd won in the end was simply Brave General. Basically, they dropped him a good effort badge. So, under the excuse that the new rat Guais were causing trouble in the kingdom, he beseeched many of the officials in the court to have the rats segregated to the southwest corner of the kingdom. Though this enraged the king, resulting in the executions of all those in favour of the segregation, as well as the outraged departure from these lands by the third prince, whom we'll catch up to in the next chapter. And finally, the punishment and solitary confinement of the first prince, imprisoned by his father for his outward hatred of the Wind Sage. In the end, only the second prince, the least favourite son, remained by his father's side. And by the way, at this stage of the story, these guys and their kingdom were all human, only becoming rats a while after the prince's imprisonment. One day, the prince's cell was left open, and he returned to the outside, where he believed that the kingdom had now been usurped by the rats, seeing nothing but humanoid rat Guais now around the place. So he stormed into his father's hall to find a short, stout rat with the voice of his father. And as he went to strike this imposter down, the Yellowwind Sage showed the prince his reflection, and he learned that he too was now a ginormous, fat rat. Now, it's not clear just how exactly this kingdom became ratified. That's already a word, but I don't care. Though, if you ask me, this has Bodhisattva Lingji written all over it, perhaps becoming so fed up of this disrespectful king and saying, you know what, if you love rats so much, then you shall rule over nothing save for a kingdom of rat guais. Then again, it could also be the doing of the Yellow Wind Sage, garnering perhaps more empathy for his kind by making everybody look like him. Though this would be quite the feat of power that I'm not sure the Rat Sage would be capable of. A while later though, for reasons not quite clear, though perhaps having something to do with the Wind Sage seeking yet even more power, he and his followers departed from the Kingdom of Flowing Sands, passing through the neighbouring Yellow Wind Ridge, a region also under the apparent influence of Bodhisattva Lingji, where long ago the stones had absorbed the essences of the sky and earth, becoming themselves sentient stone guais, and two of them even ascending to the roles of mountain deities, known as the Mother and Father of Stones. But a while after these stone guais came into existence, those heads of Bodhisattva Lingji began to numerously emerge from the ground around here as well, swallowing any creatures unlucky enough to get too close. One of the stone guais then took it upon himself to deal with this problem, crushing each of these heads into dust in order to protect the ridge. So, in doing this, he'd merely unknowingly allowed himself to become a new mount of Bodhisattva Lingji. The heads would all regrow on his body, increasing his strength and dominating his mind. Now, the entities containing the will of the Buddha were no longer immobile, avoidable dangers, but rather this colossal stone guai, called the Shigandang, that now, with, movement and mobility, hunted the creatures of the ridge instead. Just like the Kingdom of Flowing Sands and the Fuban, the stone guais vainly attempted to defeat this new enemy, and whilst we can infer Bodhisattva Lingji's motives for the former kingdom, it is less clear why he decided to take down this lot, though the Mother and Father of Stones were seemingly able to produce numerous stone guais as offcuts of their own essences. So perhaps Lingji was merely attempting to control the growth of these rock guais. But in the fight against the Shigandang, the Mother of Stones, who was still able to move at this time, was very reluctant to do any fighting herself, claiming that doing so would risk shattering her precious moonstone quartz, which bestowed her with much of her power. Though, when the Shigandang's victory began to become clear, she did in the end join the fight, shattering her blue quartz and falling into despair. Meanwhile, the keeper of the Yellow Wind Ridge, who was basically the desert equivalent of this guy from Chapter 1, refused outright to do any fighting, and so didn't. And as the Shigandang continued its mountain rampage, it was finally stopped by the arrival of the Yellow Wind Sage, who encouraged the Mother of Stones to fight once more, and together the two subdued this guai. The sage then stole its essence, using part of it to seal the creature away. Only by obtaining the 6 eyes of the Buddha scattered about this region could the Shigandang then ever reawaken. I explain more about how to complete that quest in this video. The rest of the essence, though, was then gifted by the sage to the Mother and Father of Stones for fighting so valiantly before, though this angered the keeper of Yellow Wind Ridge, who got nothing because he did nothing to help, and he coveted the essence from the rock guais thereafter. The Mother and Father of Stones would then create the Son of Stones, but their family would eventually be broken up, where one day the Father of Stones encountered a girl who'd fled her village and her parents that were forcing her into a marriage she didn't want. So she found and sought sanctuary with the Father of Stones, and sort of became his chef. The pair then lived in harmony for 2 years, him gathering ingredients and her cooking them. But when people from the girl's village finally discovered her, the girl, not wanting to bring violence to the stone guais who'd treated her so well, decided to sneak away by cover of darkness. However, she slipped, fell off a cliff, and died. Then, upon discovering her body, the Father of Stones opted to leave for the Flaming Mountains. The deity there, called Rakshasi, who we'll come back to a lot more in Chapter 5, was said to have the power of resurrection. Though, upon reaching Rakshasi, the Father of Stones was told that nothing could be done for this girl, that even if she was brought back to life, her body would be nothing but a broken shell, well. The Father of Stones, unwilling to accept that, stayed in the Flaming Mountains and waited, hoping that one day Rakshasi would change her mind, even as the girl's corpse turned into nothing but bones. Meanwhile, back in Yellowwind Ridge, the Mother of Stones sent their son to find him, though the Son of Stones set off in the wrong direction, winding up instead at Mount Huaguo, where, captivated by a giant leaping grasshopper, or locust, or whatever this thing is, he remained, eventually forgetting his quest altogether. This then left the Mother of Stones alone to protect the mountain, yet she was finding, as time passed, her ability to move was beginning to wane. Eventually, she became fully immobilized, as we find her in the game, and thereafter relied on these quartz-infused poise stones to act in her stead. She also, for her own personal protection, created the Stone Vanguard, though this didn't prevent the efforts of the region's keeper, who still desired the power of the stone essence for himself. And once the mother was left all alone, he one day transformed into a stone Guai and attacked her. By the time her followers were able to prise him off, he'd absorbed only half of her essence, and as the Stone Vanguard pommeled the keeper into the ground, he now found himself unable to change back from a stone Guai, thereafter remaining trapped in the ridge as the Man in Stones. Now, back to the Yellowwind Sage, and sometime after defeating both the Fuban and Shigandang entities, the events of Journey to the West take place. And despite the Sage's seemingly heroic nature up to this point, he is still a Yaoguai, with an accompanying desire to consume human flesh, or at any rate, the flesh of Tang Sanzang, who it was said if any of the Yaoguai could consume, they would be imbued with great power, as the monk had 10 lifetimes of power contained within his flesh. Thus, when Tang Sanzang, Sun Wukong, and Zhubajia are passing through the region, they chance upon the sage's loyal disciple, the Tiger Vanguard, who decides that they'll make a fine meal for his master. Of course, challenging the Monkey King, and Bajia, to be fair, is pretty stupid, and the Tiger Vanguard soon realizes this, resolving instead to trickery, fleeing, tearing off his skin, and draping it over a tiger-shaped rock as a decoy. Then, transforming into a gale, he went back and seized Tang Sanzang, bringing the monk back to his two sons and the sage, explaining to the sage in full just who the monk was and the journey he was on. The sage, then fearing the power of Tang's companions, bade them wait a few days to see if Wukong shows up, which eventually of course he does, a mere half day later in fact. And by this point, Wukong had also enlisted the help of the very same bodhisattva, Lingji, that the Wind Sage had now meddled with twice. In the ensuing fight, Tiger Vanguard Senior was killed by Zhubajia, orphaning his two sons, and the Yellowwind Sage is then subdued by Bodhisattva Lingji. And, much like Guanyin did with the Black Bear Guai, Lingji, still seeing the potential of this powerful Yaoguai, took the sage as his disciple. The journey to the west resumed, and all the while, the once rich regions and kingdoms of Yellowwind Ridge and the flowing sands, devoid of the Rat King's protection, decayed into barren, desolate wastes. That was until the Yellowwind Sage's return, which coincided again with the death of Sun Wukong and the scattering of his 6 relics, one of which fell into the hands of the Yellowwind Sage. We know by now that this guy's whole thing is seizing vessels of power, and this was a power the likes of which he'd never seen before. Only with a container grand enough to hold the power of this relic could he ever hope to release it. And who in his grasp was grander than his now master, Bodhisattva Lingji? In a surprise attack, Lingji became beheaded, as his head is stowed under the arm of the sage, who then returns to Yellowwind Ridge. Lingji, now reduced in power, follows after him, taking the form of a headless singer, strumming a lute-like instrument called a sangjian. When we arrive in the Yellowwind Ridge, he offers guidance, singing of the history of this land, and granting the Destined One a couple of additional powers to aid in our quest, which will ultimately restore him. But first, the returned sage reunited with many of those he once knew. He found, first of all, that the 2 sons of his Tiger Vanguard had grown up to become heroes of this region, protectors of the good and devourers of the evil, with a temple then constructed in their honor, though the younger brother harbored a little jealousy towards his elder being the more famous of the 2. Though, when meeting Yellowwind Sage again, both brothers blamed him for the death of their father and plotted to take their revenge. Being no match for the power of a bodhisattva head though, the younger was grievously wounded, and the elder, in bargain for his brother's life, life, pledged his allegiance to the Wind Sage, inheriting his father's title of Tiger Vanguard. The younger brother was a little mad at this, and afterwards denounced his brother before retreating to a well where he'd played during much of his childhood. The new Tiger Vanguard then blamed the sage for destroying his family twice over, but he knew there was nothing he could really do, no hope of defeating the Wind Sage, so he settled for devouring a few lesser Yaoguais each day and just kind of bullying the King of Flowing Sands a bit. The King of Flowing Sands, of course, is still around, in rat form, along with his second son. Now, there is a little more to the story of the Mad Tiger, but it's not at all crucial to the main plot, and I explained it already in the first chapter of my previous video, so check that out if you're interested. Finally, the sage paid a visit to the Mother of Stones, only to now find her guarded by the Stone Vanguard. Not wanting this entity to cause him any trouble, the sage ordered Tiger Vanguard to kill it, but the Tiger Vanguard, not wanting to anger the whole region of Stone Guais, instead treated with the Stone Vanguard, agreeing that the stones would guard one half of the region, which included the still imprisoned Shigandang, whilst the tiger guarded the other. In fact, this worked out even better for the Yellow Wind Sage, who after re-establishing himself fully in the region, declared he would retreat into the valley between the two halves where he wished to remain undisturbed, attempting to tap into the power of Wukong's relic. The only two ways inside this valley were thus sealed by two keys, the keenness of tiger and sternness of stone, given to their respective Guais, and only with both could the valley now be accessed. The King of Flowing Sands was annoyed at having no involvement in this, but seriously, I don't think anybody was really taking the guy seriously anymore. I should also briefly mention that around this time, the yellow robe squire Huaguo came to the region at the behest of his brother. If that sounds familiar, it's because he's part of the same plot as the white-clad noble, and both of them are actually so-called brothers of Erlang Shen. So, just like the white-clad noble, yellow robe squire's task is to wait for the Destined One, test our worth in combat, then guide us to the secret region of this land. In Chapter 1, White-clad Noble gestured towards the location of the third and final bell to find the soul of Elder Jinchi, and in Chapter 2, similarly, we're guided to another portal to the past, or just somewhere otherworldly. The yellow-robed squire would also meet the Headless Singer as he passed through here, and the two would share a debate on the existence of karma, something Lingji himself clearly serves up in plentiful degree by the way he usually rules these lands, making everybody adhere to the natural hierarchy of things, superior and inferior, though the yellow-robed squire is less convinced that karma exists. All of these prior events that take place then set the scene for the Destined One's arrival, and if you've played the game through, you know how this goes by now. We first defeat the second Prince of Flowing Sands, then the king tries to summon his first son for help. His first son then eats him, clearly still angry at his years of imprisonment, as well as their current rodent predicaments. We then defeat the Tiger Vanguard, and Lingji ensures we obtain his power to turn into stone. Then, over in the Stone Guai Pass, we can meet the Man in Stones, who still, even frozen himself, covets the Mother of Stone's complete essence. Though, with the thing he's long desired so desperately finally in his grasp, he believes himself actually far more powerful than he is. We tell him to sit down, take the power back from him, and make his sole purpose in life thereafter to be a trader for us. We also defeat the Mother's Stone Vanguard, and release the Shigandang from its confinement before defeating it too. Then, we of course go to the past and help the Wind Sage defeat the Fuban in the first place, as I mentioned at the start of the chapter, obtaining the Wind Tamer vessel from Lingji's stone head as we do. I mean, seriously, much as we aren't Sun Wukong, our ability to waltz through and disrespect centuries of history sounds a lot like the sort of thing that Wukong would do. Finally, with both keys to the valley obtained, and a final gift from the Headless Singer, the Pluck of Many spell, we are ready to face the core antagonist of Chapter 2.
Besides every sage, a villain resides. Beneath every mountain, an abyss lies. Where disparities persist, bloodbaths may arise. I cannot escape, and nor can you!
Of course, once the Rat Sage realizes just how formidable we are, he summons his old trick of the Samadhi Winds, clearly forgetting our more friendly encounter centuries prior.
Wind Tamer, how is it yours to use?
When finally defeating this rat Guai though, his master, Lingji, finally returns for his head and goads his disciple for his short-sighted endeavors. After all, we do have to ask what the Yellowwind Sage was actually striving for in all this, because as far as I can tell, the sage's personal motivation throughout this time has merely been the acquisition of power for power's sake, constantly seeking to steal pieces of Lingji's power, and when obtaining Wukong's relic, resorting to extreme measures to unlock that too. But really in all this, it seemed he had no end goal. Nothing was ever enough for him. After all, why else choose to leave the Kingdom of Flowing Sands, where all of his suggestions would practically and literally become law? And I think ultimately, the sage's personal ambitions contrasted with the more continual goal of Bodhisattva Lingji, who blames himself for the renewed reign of havoc brought on this ridge, before thanking us for restoring order and granting the relic as a reward. Again, I think that quote spoken by him at the end of this chapter sums up the core values that Lingji strives to maintain, that being the natural order of the world. So it's not entirely clear just what befalls the Yellowwind Sage after this, but given he doesn't disintegrate immediately upon his defeat like many of the enemies do, I would wager he fell back under Lingji's control, with more stern supervision this time. Though the question of how this rat Guai obtained the Great Sage's relic still isn't yet entirely clear, but we will learn more of the truth as we continue. But now it's into the snowy expanses of Chapter 3. Okay, I think you know how this goes by now. Chapter 3 is mostly a tale of monks, longs, and varying degrees of Buddha, with philosophical ideals playing a much larger part than ever before. But, as usual, we have to start off long ago, on the peak of Mount Lingshan, where there were two disciples of Maitreya. Maitreya is that child Buddha we meet a lot in this chapter, and is specifically meant to be the Buddha of the future, to bring about Buddhism once again in a time when it's been forgotten. Maitreya's two disciples were Jinchanzi, a holy being who in the future reincarnates as Tang Sangzang and goes on the journey to the west, and the other being Yellowbrow, who goes on to become a primary villain of Journey to the West and this chapter. These two figures, throughout their early training, had developed entirely opposing views on the world. Jinchanzi believed that whilst capable of pursuing evil, humanity was also able to achieve great good, and the guidance of the Buddhist teachings could help them stay on that path. However, if all beings were capable of good and evil, this called into question just how the Celestials could deem themselves superior to humanity. But Yellowbrow, wanting to remain superior, disagreed with Jinchanzi's philosophy, claiming that by their core nature, humanity is entirely evil, and that yes, actually he was superior to them. The two had this graduation debate where they went back and forth and developed these concepts further. Yellowbrow posed that the meaning of human life was to indulge in the moment, giving in to base desires and wants as they come. Basically, do what makes you happy. A very nihilistic view on the world. Jinchanzi, though, thoroughly disagrees, giving examples like starving parents selling their children for the brief respite of food, only to, of course, regret that decision for the rest of their lives. A moment's pleasure, he says, can lead to an eternity of pain. To which Yellowbrow argues, nonsense, which is also the name of one of the best songs from the soundtrack, and sums up his entire attitude to classic Buddhist philosophy. He claims that life is merely an endless loop of indulgence and suffering. In pain, one finds revel, and in revel, pain. Ultimately believing that given the chance, humans will always indulge their desires, regardless of the wider impact and wider evils that it causes. So, to prove his point, he transforms into a giant soft-shelled turtle and washes up next to a poor, ailing village, showing them that from his skin pours literal jewels. But he also provides healing and makes it rain fish. Thus is he worshipped and repaid in kind with tributes of his own. A system is established where jewels are collected and distributed by orderly means to the villagers. But Yellowbrow, of course, is here to prove a point, and sensing the greed of one particular man in the crowd, Yellowbrow amplifies it, sending the man into a frenzy as he indulges his greed, slicing open the turtle, causing it visible pain and scooping up what he can, even as he's slapped away with his face and eyes hanging off, the man is still clutching for the riches on the ground, clearly having been entranced by Yellowbrow. Kinda like Gollum falling into Mount Doom, that reminded me of this a lot. Then, seeing that one man dared to do it, other villagers immediately follow suit, until eventually they all grasp at the soft-shelled turtle, some fearing perhaps that if others are going to indulge, they don't want to miss out on their share. This generous, if somewhat repulsive being who'd already done nothing but give was torn to pieces for its wealth, as the people wanted even more. And when Jinchanzi visited Yellowbrow in this form, they came back to the same arguments.
Once again, I proved it to you, Jinchanzi.
You chose a means to an end, not to a proof. You sow chaos in hearts just for the sake of winning. How absurd and pathetic.
If not for winning, why debate over means and ends?
Jinchanzi's point here is that Yellowbrow had manufactured a situation to work entirely in his favor. He picked the poorest village he could find, appeared as a visually abhorrent, if weakened monster, made hurting him the only way to obtain his treasures, and even with all that put in place, he still needed to kind of warp this guy's mind. He did indeed prove an instance of his points, but with a clever example, nothing more. Ultimately, Yellowbrow is so obsessed with winning his ongoing debate against Jinchanzi that he'll always stack the odds to ensure that he wins, a theme that continues into this chapter. But first come the events of Journey to the West. Still unable to definitively win his debate with Jinchanzi, who by this point has reincarnated into Tang Sanzang, Yellowbrow tries another tactic, and during a time that his master Maitreya is away elsewhere, Yellowbrow steals his magical sack and golden symbol artifacts before traveling east to establish his own fake Thunderclap temple, populated with fake followers, to practice his own twisted form of fake Buddhism. Later events in the game's timeline will mirror this all heavily, but this first time around, the journeyers to the west stumble across Yellowbrow's new Thunderclap temple, mistaking it for their destination of the real Thunderclap temple, letting their guard down and enabling Yellowbrow to capture them. Sun Wukong, being as usual the only one to suspect a trap and being powerful as he is, was trapped by Yellowbrow within the magical unbreakable golden symbols. And as the three others were captured, Yellowbrow revealed himself not to be Maitreya, but actually, well, Yellowbrow. Fortunately this time, the Jade Emperor actually sent some help from the Celestial Court. Kang Jinlong, one of the 28 constellations that light up the night sky, came down and flew into the symbols, smashing them apart with her horn and releasing Sun Wukong. So, with the help of Kang Jinlong and the other of the constellations, Sun Wukong fought against Yellowbrow, who then used his second trick, the magical sack stolen from Maitreya, to entrap all of his assailants. This drained them of energy, and they too became imprisoned in New Thunderclap Temple. Sun Wukong was able to free himself and then freed Tang Sanzang, but once again, they were all recaptured in Yellowbrow's sack, save this time for Wukong, who managed to slip away and escape. He then got help from and sent even more of the Pantheon deities up against Yellowbrow, including the Great Turtle and Snake generals who will come up again later, but again, all were trapped and defeated. Eventually, Wukong was forced to seek aid from Yellowbrow's former master, Maitreya, who, offering the Spellbinder ability, suggested perhaps a less upfront approach than the monkey's classic fighting tactic. So, this time, Sun Wukong lured Yellowbrow into the mountains, where Yellowbrow came across an oddly placed melon field tended by a farmer. And, given his lifelong philosophy of indulging in the moment, Yellowbrow began to eat one of the melons, though his indulgence would cost him his victory, since the melon he ate was in fact Sun Wukong, who now had infiltrated Yellowbrow's stomach, causing him immense pain from within. Amidst his agony, the farmer revealed themselves to be Maitreya, and Yellowbrow finally accepted defeat. Wukong emerged, and Maitreya took back his stolen weapons as well as Yellowbrow to become once again his disciple, again setting the stage for Yellowbrow's return by the events of this game. But first, a few more things that set the events of this chapter in motion. We see, at the start of the game when Wukong is killed, that Mount Huaguo also gets destroyed. Following this, a monkey, called the Macaque Chief, leads away a group of his kin to find a new home, originally settling in the Flaming Mountains. But when many of the troop are struck by a terrible plague in this region, the chief gathers all the infected and throws them into a pit to their death. Many of the remaining monkeys, shocked by this, then abandoned their chief, going on to become circus monkeys that would also eventually lure in and kill humans. Meanwhile, the infected monkeys, thrown into the pit, were rescued by the Keeper of the Flaming Mountains, more on him later, who healed them. From their wounds grew wings, and they became known as tenors. Then, seeking revenge on their chief, they slaughtered his few remaining loyal followers, with only the chief himself escaping, who then journeyed on alone to the New West. Meanwhile, after Sun Wukong's death, Zhu Bajie and Sha Wujing, their other companion who's weirdly never mentioned in this game, allegedly ended up fugitives of the Celestial Court, whilst Tang Sangzang was said to have retreated into the shadows, though the details of this are hazy at best and only come from one line uttered by Yellowbrow. Also preceding these events, but playing into them later, is the beautifully animated cutscene from the end of Chapter 2, involving the fox and the scholar. This fox, you see, was no ordinary fox. It's said that foxes who live for 100 years gain the ability to transform into humans, whilst those that manage to live for 1,000 can communicate with celestials and become what's known as a fox immortal. This fox desperately aspired to that role, though they were warned that the quickest way for a fox Guai to obtain power was to seduce and consume the essence of humans, though by doing this, they would forever bar themselves from the ultimate achievement of becoming a fox immortal, which was a much longer and more arduous path. This fox resolved to remain steadfast and disciplined. It would never consume humans, but merely live among them once it could transform. In preparation for obtaining its first transformation ability, the fox would wander near human villages to observe their ways, where one day it fell into a hunter's trap, was rescued by this man, and taken home to heal by his warm fire. Grateful for the man's kindness, the fox planned to aid his career in gratitude. But that night, the man had a dream, where the aspiring fox took human form, the two fell in love, had children, and led a wonderful life for a time. Though, one day, years later, the man returned home to find his grandchildren dead, and his wife now returned to Guai form, consuming their son. Finally, perhaps having fallen for the allure of the quicker path to power, and no longer able to resist consuming the essences of humans. Awakening, now fearful of such a future ever coming to pass, the man makes the tough decision to kill the fox before any such thing can happen. Wearing her pelt for a time, where her soul lingers on, the man sets off once again to become a monk at the new Thunderclap Temple. We'll return to him again soon. But first, back to Yellowbrow, who after the death of Sun Wukong somehow becomes another recipient of one of Wukong's relics, his nose this time. With such power in hand, Yellowbrow's ego and desires only once again grow, things which he of course decides to indulge, because that's like his whole philosophy. Maybe with his newfound power, he could finally win his debate once and for all and prove Jinchanzi wrong. So, again, he steals Matreya's golden symbols and seed sack, the latter of which he uses to house the relic, and to be fair, utilizes its power much more successfully than the Black Bear Guai or Yellowwind Sage ever could. Then, he returns to the New West, and again rebuilds the now very crumbling Thunderclap Temple. Now, it's unlikely that the great Buddha Maitreya was actually foolish enough to fall for this deception a second time, and very likely that Yellowbrow's return was part of a grander design that Maitreya enabled. A design to test the skills, power, and resolve of various monkeys until the arrival of the true Destined One. But we'll come back to this plot point later. Following Yellowbrow's return, he wastes no time in regaining followers. A lot of stuff happens now, and the order isn't entirely clear, so the way I'm structuring it is me making a best guess here. As I said, one of the first things Yellowbrow does upon his return is rebuild the new Thunderclap Temple bigger and better than ever before. And he funds a lot of this by bringing in followers from nearby villages, getting them fully invested in his teachings, and then explaining that all true followers must give away all of their money. And it works surprisingly remarkably well. He also, at this time, begins construction of the Pagoda Realm, that sprawling prison and seemingly the only place in the game without invisible walls next to ledges, though very annoyingly so. Over time, he also gathers 4 key disciples, disciples, each of which has the word non at the start of their name, which sounds weird in English, but there is actually a very good reason that it translates like this. You see, each of these names is supposed to serve as the direct opposite of the companions of Tang Sanzang. Wukong, you see, literally means awakened by emptiness, or awakened from the void. So, non-void is a simplified way of saying not Wukong. Similarly, Bajie means 8 precepts, 8 rules, or 8 things we're able to do, alluding to the word able. Sha Wujing means pure sand monk, giving us non-pure. And finally, Tang Sanzang's own horse was called White Dragon Horse, giving us non-white. So yeah, he hates and opposes Jinchanzi that much that he literally names his 4 followers the opposite of Tang Sanzang's, which seems incredibly petty, though perhaps even more so in the English translation. Now let's look a little more closely at each of these 4 disciples, starting with Non-Void, a character whom we're already familiar with because he is in fact the scholar from earlier that killed the fox. He was also, though, one of the earliest to follow Yellowbrow since his return, and like his master, enjoyed engaging in debates. Then, Non-Able is probably the closest follower to more true Buddhism, distinctly abstaining from indulgence in the name of the greater good. He strictly sticks to his familiar training methods, citing that using other methods he doesn't believe in meant that even if he won with those methods, he'd still ultimately lose. Now, these 2 disciples, Non-Able and Non-Void, once debated over whether killing was evil. Non-Void, who'd of course killed the fox Guai in an attempt to avoid an even more terrible future, cited that sometimes killing was necessary, a lesser of 2 evils. Non-Able, though, argued that evil was evil, and attempting to justify it through convoluted means was in itself also a sin. And this realization then haunted Non-Void, who had of course for all these years attempted to justify killing the fox due to his dream. And after this, the 2 nons never debated again. In fact, Non-Able was eventually punished by Yellowbrow for telling his master that he'd never achieve Buddhahood, and that Yellowbrow's whole philosophy of indulgence was in fact bullshit. Non-Able's hands were bound behind his back, and he was sent outside to wait until he stopped being stubborn. It's not clear how long he remained in this position, but he's still there when the Destined One finally comes across him. Non-White then was part of a prestigious performer group, and he longed always to play the hero, but always became relegated by his peers to the sneered-at role of jester. One day, he became so fed up that he simply started playing the hero on stage and beating up the actual hero. The crowd, who weren't expecting a performance of the play that goes wrong, were angry, and the group didn't get paid. Non-White was fired, and afterwards concluded that they'd never picked him to play the hero because he just didn't look the part, didn't have the right aura. So, armed with 2 poison blades, he killed the hero actor in an alleyway that night and stole his face, returning to the troupe the next morning and finally being permitted, through a twisted deception, to play the hero. Of course, eventually he was found out and believed to be utterly mad, was sent away to be rehabilitated at a faraway temple, the new Thunderclap Temple, which is either the best or worst place that he could have been sent. Yellowbrow, you see, loved the jester's story, understandably so. The guy, after all, was a prime example to confirm Yellowbrow's beliefs, a guy who had indulged in gross evil to get his own way. Yellowbrow knew of the prophecy that the Destined One would return, so sent Non-White to guard the entrance to the Valley of Ecstasy, promising that if Non-White could defeat and wear the Destined One's face, then he would truly become the real hero.
I'm the real hero.
Finally, non-pure is a downright embodiment of laziness. After all, indulging in doing nothing is indulgence all the same, and shirking his duties would often result in the needless suffering of others. At some point following his return also, Yellowbrow arranged a grand ceremony, inviting Guais, gods, immortals, and Buddhas from all around, and whilst most of the attendees suspected a trap, given Yellowbrow's track record, none of them successfully guessed that he now held the power of a relic. The Turtle and Snake generals both made up a part of a god named Zhuanwu, whose purpose was to purge the world of evil Yaoguais. Thus, upon Yellowbrow's return, these 2 fought with him, but Yellowbrow released the the power of the relic, which took the form of a 10-tailed golden fish and entangled the turtle general. Then Yellowbrow summoned the Apramana bat, which apparently could match the snake general in combat. With each of the two titans distracted, Yellowbrow then summoned a snowstorm, which by the way is the reason that this whole region is covered in snow. And reptilian by nature, the cold sent both turtle and snake general into a long hibernation. The turtle sank into the lake, and even more tragically, the snake, despite being an immortal, was carved up into pieces on the shore. Meanwhile, back at the Celestial Court, we return to the 28 constellations, or in this case, 27. The Rooster constellation, known as the Dawnstar, had mysteriously gone missing. We'll discover the specifics of why and how in Chapter 4, but what his absence did here was give Kang Jinlong, the constellation from earlier, the excuse to also attend Yellowbrow's ceremony. The Dawnstar had vanished around a similar time that Yellowbrow sent out his announcement, and the court decided the coincidence to be worth investigating. In truth though, Kang Jinlong was more interested in learning about Sun Wukong and the fate of his 6 relics, and Yellowbrow, just as he had in the past, captured her inside his magical sack. Only this time, she became dazed and bewildered by the Wukong relic contained within, and when she emerged, she pledged herself as a disciple to Yellowbrow. The remaining constellations, who now lost 2 among their ranks, decided that it all had something to do with the fact that both of those 2 had helped Sun Wukong in the past. Again, we'll explain what really happened to the Dawnstar in Chapter 4, but ultimately, this made the remaining 26 constellations afraid to investigate the disappearances any further, leaving Kang Jinlong and the Dawnstar to their fates with nobody to save them. Finally, one more attendee of Yellowbrow's grand ceremony was the 3rd Prince of Flowing Sands, the one that in the last chapter had abandoned his home in disgust. Since then, he'd become a disciple of Bodhisattva Guai, a famed subduer of Yaoguais whom the 3rd Prince had hoped to learn skills from in order to defeat the Yellowwind Sage. But then, Journey to the West happened, and the Yellowwind Sage was taken by Lingji back to Mount Lingshan. So, believing the problem resolved, the 3rd Prince simply stayed with his new Bodhisattva master. That is, until the day he was invited to Yellowbrow's ceremony. Like most, he suspected a trap, so brought along 4 powerful captains for protection. Though, just like Kang Jinlong, they grossly underestimated Yellowbrow's power with the relic, and Yellowbrow destroyed each of the 4 captains one by one before corrupting each into hideous vessels. One of them was ridden with holes, growing many eyes from them and becoming the gatekeeper of the Pagoda realm named Captain Lotus Vision. Another had his limbs broken, with those of many others grafted on in their place, and was left as a corpse in the Valley of Ecstasy, Captain Void Illusion. The next had its head ripped off, the blood and pus transforming into a lotus flower, and became the gatekeeper of Thunderclap Temple, that's Captain Kalpawave. Whilst the first captain was simply defeated in a debate with Yellowbrow, their hideously transformed vessel then placed into the Mani Wheel atop the Pagoda realm, where they became Captain Wisevoice, singing beguiling chants throughout this region to blind and madden the prisoners within, including the 3rd Prince, who, taken prisoner, was then tossed in here, forced then to remove his eyes and ears in order to escape the madness induced by his former captain. Though, even then, thrown in the cell and left to rot, he couldn't help but question why his master had never come to rescue him. After this, as well, Yellowbrow used the beguiling power of Captain Wisevoice to transform several of his craftsmen from the temple into these lantern wardens, to also guard the Pagoda realm, using their lanterns to blind all those within. Lastly, before our arrival, 2 more characters are sent ahead to this land to aid us. Firstly, another brother of Erlang Shen, tasked with testing our worth, this time called the Green-Capped Martialist, and Sun Wukong's old companion Zhubaja, who is sent by the old monkey at Mount Huaguo from the start of the game to back up the Destined One against this more powerful enemy. Though, upon arriving, Bajia is immediately captured before even finding us and trapped within the same golden symbols that bound Wukong long ago. Now enter the Destined One, and notice that even in the opening scene here, the real Maitreya is watching us from the get-go, and fairly immediately after this, we come across the Macaque Chief, also making his way to the new Thunderclap Temple. Though it's not entirely clear why he attacks us, but I'd wager that after driven from his home and suffering in the harsh world for so many years, he's regressed to a more primal monkey nature. Or perhaps he just sees a monkey that looks just like Sun Wukong and is angry that that Wukong was the reason he was driven from his homeland. Though, after his first defeat, where he runs off, we meet Maitreya, or rather, we meet Yellowbrow in disguise. With hindsight, the yellow robes are a dead giveaway. We then defeat Kang Jinlong, but get imprisoned in the Pagoda Realm, where we escape and defeat Captain Wise Voice to end the prison's chanting. We can also later recover the spirits of all 4 of these captains and return them to the third prince, who offers his gratitude before setting off for parts unknown. Though I do wonder how he'd have reacted if we told him that we killed his entire family. Then we fight Kang Jinlong again, this time in her human form as Kang Jin Star. And as Zhu Bajie, trapped within the symbols, senses our presence, he rings them, and this whole region turns out to be the back of the hibernating Turtle General, who now reawakens. And just as she did in Journey to the West, Kang Jinlong shatters open the golden symbols, though it's just not deliberate on her part this time. Her fate after this is left unclear, but presumably she returns to the Celestial Court and regains her sanity. Zhu Bajie is freed, and together we'll make our way towards a new Thunderclap Temple, discovering the long-decayed corpse of Snake General as we come ashore. Though, before we reach the temple, the Macaque Chief does, where he's goaded by Yellowbrow to become one of his followers. Yellowbrow arguing that the Macaque Chief has suffered long enough as a lowly monkey and now deserves to rise high and mighty, that if he had a power like Sun Wukong, he could make others suffer instead of him. And agreeing to this, the Macaque Chief enters Yellowbrow's sack. Zhu Bajie also goes on ahead of the Destined One and is later captured inside Yellowbrow's sack too. But one more thing before this chapter's final showdown is a conclusion to the story of the Fox and the Scholar. Down at the start of the Forest of Felicity, the Destined One discovers that same fox pelt, now on a frozen corpse, with the fox's spirit still bound to it. The spirit then joins us, allowing us to transform into a fox until the completion of this quest, where she begs that we seek out the new monk named Non-Void. Confronting him in New Thunderclap Temple in this form, we can see that even after all these years, he still remained troubled by his actions.
My peace. Still you can't take my life in defense against yours.
And upon his defeat, he reflects once again on the nature of his evil deed, realizing that in meddling with a Yaoguai as he did, he trapped himself in this chain of events from the start. Returning then to where we first met the fox, she'll reflect that it was his fear of Yaoguais that caused all of this in the first place.
Those who fear Yaoguais are fouler than what they fear.
But with all of that resolved, it's time for the Destined One to get their fill of Yellowbrow's preaching on evil and indulgence, as after our first round of blows with Yellowbrow, we find ourselves trapped inside the magical seed sack and forced to face off against the Macaque Chief, as Yellowbrow from above preaches and pretty much attempts to justify every classical sin.
All beings suffer as they heed not the precepts and indulge. I say, nonsense! Thou shalt kill, lest feuds instill. Thou shalt lust, before all loves turn into dust. Thou shalt indulge, or life is but a scourge.
Again, it's clear the guy's whole obsession is with being right, or more specifically with winning, I guess.
Lost. I will not lose.
But with Yellowbrow defeated, Maitreya conveniently reappears, claiming that he meant to handle Yellowbrow himself, but we were just quicker. And Bajie once again calls out the unlikelihood that Maitreya would have fallen for the same tricks twice. And yes, there is indeed more to this than meets the eye. We'll explain it in more detail later in the video, but it comes down to this. Putting an ongoing string of monkeys who might be the Destined One through these varying appropriate trials to retrieve Wukong's relics, and knowing that only the true Destined One will be powerful enough to obtain them all. A concept that's also further being tested by each brother of Erlang Shen in each chapter. And this one is no different, where we're tested by the green-capped martialist in Maitreya's old melon field from Journey to the West. But if you want a full guide on the steps to that quest specifically, I cover it in another video, this one. Otherwise, we'll come back to the lore significance of this event in the final chapter of the video. But for now, it's on to chapter 4. And to kick this one off, going in the same sort of chronological order that we've been doing, I want to jump straight back to the ancient events at the Celestial Courts, which will be very relevant in this chapter. Remember the Dawnstar, the rooster constellation that Kang Jinlong went looking for? Well, he was also the son of a bodhisattva named Pilampo, and was eventually promoted to the role of Constellation Officer. From afar, at his promotion ceremony, he was witnessed by Hong Yi, a close friend of both him and his mother, and in fact growing up, she'd viewed the Dawnstar as something of a younger brother, though now, in his newfound position, he never glanced her way during the ceremony, much to her disappointment. Meanwhile, at the court, long before the journey to the west, Zhu Bajie was a human at this time called Tianpeng, a renowned admiral of the court, but Tianpeng had something of a weakness for women, many women, but during a lotus viewing banquet, he beheld for the first time the moon goddess Chang'e, and was utterly captivated by her beauty. As he stared at this goddess, a maiden in a violet gauze dress handed him a cup of wine, attempting to get his attention, but whilst he took the cup from the maiden's hands, his gaze never strayed from Chang'e. As the ceremony came to an end, Tianpeng also saw for the first time Sun Wukong being drunkenly removed from the ceremony, and it made him wonder if he would ever get to be as drunk as that monkey. Now, in the original story, Tianpeng did get very drunk, and in his stupor, chased after Chang'e, briefly, in the game at least, bumping into the Violet Maiden again as he followed. Only when catching up to Chang'e, he found that she was already courting with another member of the court, and this is possibly even the Jade Emperor himself, it's not clear. Unfortunately, a member of the court who was a complete telltale grass, known as the Supreme Celestial Inspector, saw what Tianpeng had done, and as punishment for his lust, and perhaps just to protect the Jade Emperor's own reputation, Tianpeng was cast down from the celestial heavens to live 1,000 human lifetimes, with each cursed to end in a love tragedy. If he ever dared to love again, it would only lead to suffering. But his soul, on its way down, suffered a mishap, and wound up instead in a pig pen, becoming the adorable little pigman hybrid that we know, albeit one probably not best suited to courting women anymore anyway. And after a while, he did stop trying to court women, instead becoming a friend of Sun Wukong and disciple of Tang Sanzang on the journey to the west. The Violet Maiden, though, bereft of the one she loved, who I think she'd only met like once or twice for a couple seconds, but there we go, also gave up her life at the Celestial Courts. Heading to the mortal realm to look for her love, she wound up taking the form of a spider Guai. In fact, there's a theory that she misheard what befell Tianpeng, and since pig and spider sound very similar in Chinese, Zhu and Jiju, she perhaps became a spider especially, thinking it would make the two more, species compatible. But alas, we'll come back to her in a bit. But first, something else happened on the journey, which will factor back into Chapter 4 somewhat, and that involves a Scorpion Queen. Yet another Guai that kidnapped Tang Sanzang, forcing Sun Wukong to save him, though her deadly venomous sting was able to wound the monkey greatly, forcing him, again this time, to seek the help of another celestial ally. Enter the Dawnstar, whom I mentioned at the start of the chapter. Constellation Officer though he was, his original form was that also of a giant rooster, the sworn enemy of scorpions, and with simply a loud crowing, the Scorpion Queen lay defeated and dead. Then, malice-driven as he was, Sun Wukong set the Scorpion Queen's cave on fire, thanked the Dawnstar for his help, and the journeyers pressed onwards. But in this game, that's not quite the end of the story. See, the Scorpion Queen had many lovers in her time. One among them was a strong Scorpion Lord with whom she had 4 sons, but eventually grew tired at their lack of a daughter to teach and left this lord behind. Though, after her death, the Scorpion Lord would eventually find his former wife's body burnt, tail severed and reduced to a pulp. Then and there, he swore one day to exact revenge against the rooster god that killed her. Then, years later, learning of a prosperous hollow that was home to many insect guais, he headed there with his sons. This place just so happened to be the same webbed hollow that the Violet Maiden, who was now the Violet Spider, had taken up residence in years prior, back during the events of Journey to the West still. And at another point in that story, in fact pretty much every point in that story, but one other point specifically, Tang Sanzang is captured again, because even after all this time and all these kidnappings, he insisted that his companions let him go off by himself and beg for alms, maybe testing his own philosophy of seeing the good in humanity. Though unknowingly coming across spider guais this time, time, the sisters invited him into their home before eventually binding the monk in silk, planning to consume him and his immense power later. But first, they went off for one of their thrice daily bathing rituals in the nearby spring. So, when Sun Wukong came to the house, he simply found his master alone and bound in a silk cocoon. But, not wanting to quickly release and risk harming his master, Sun Wukong goes to find the spider guais that did this, and is told by the local keeper of the region where to find their spring. Wukong heads over there to find the 7 women bathing naked in the spring, but deciding he doesn't want to, get a reputation as a monkey that hits naked women, he does the far more socially acceptable thing of just stealing their clothes, making it awkward, I suppose, for them to leave the pool and buying more time to rescue his master. When returning and explaining the situation of the 7 naked women to Baja, though, the pig insisted that it was far more important that they defeat the beautiful naked female spider guais. So, for the greater good, of course, he goes to do that by himself, and with zero hesitation leaps into the water, transforming into a catfish guai, too swift for the embarrassed spider women to catch. And it is at this point that Zhu Bajie recognizes her, the violet maiden that he'd met many lifetimes ago at the Celestial Court. The maiden that, though he probably didn't know it, was also there in that realm looking for him. And she too recognized Bajie. The two, then gazing into each other's eyes, transform into full-on pig and spider. She probably also at this point, if the theory is to be believed, realized that she'd gravely misheard what Bajie had actually turned into. And then, they probably have some weird Zhu on Zhizhu sex, which probably results somehow in a child. We'll get to that later. But then, the spiders, realizing finally the shit that they're in, because this is Sun Wukong after all, run off to the neighboring Temple of Yellow Flowers, seeking the protection of the centipede Guai, known as the 100-eyed Taoist Master. The journeyers, having rescued Tang Sengzang at this point and believing themselves safe for now, continue on. But, obviously, they wind up in the Temple of Yellow Flowers too. And, though they themselves are of the Buddhist faith and this temple is that of the Taoists, Tang Sengzang, ever the optimist, thinks it polite to go in and say hello regardless. In fact, very briefly, let me explain what the difference is between Buddhism and Taoism. Buddhism, first of all, ultimately involves seeking a path to enlightenment, or nirvana, by basically doing the opposite of what Yellowbrow said in Chapter 3 and shedding off all worldly greed, hatred, ignorance, and material ties. Whilst Taoism focuses more on becoming one with nature, harmonizing with the universe to achieve immortality. In this game, though, they more take on the role of two factions, both with high influence in the Celestial Court, that delicately coexist. And from this point on, their political rivalry will begin to crop up a fair bit more. But first, back to Journey to the West. The companions entered the temple to pay their respects to the Taoist, and were invited in. But when the Spider Sisters, who had come to hide out here, learned that the journeyers were now there too, they pleaded for help from the 100-eyed Taoist Master, who hatched a plan to serve poisoned tea to the group. However, Sun Wukong, as usual, was able to smell the poison and overturned the teacups. Then he fought the 7 Spider Guais into retreat, before finally being fully engaged in combat with the 100-eyed Taoist Master himself, and having to leave Zhu Bajie to eliminate the spider guais. The pig then obediently struck each down with his rake, only stopping at the last woman, the violet flame from his past whom he'd finally found after so many lifetimes. And despite his duty to his quest, Bajie could not bring himself to kill her. So, thrusting his rake into the ground, the second thing he'd thrusted that day, he instead ordered his lover to flee. Meanwhile, Wukong fought the 100-eyed Guai, before almost becoming ensnared in his blinding light attack, conjured from his many eyes. Only narrowly escaping the trap by burrowing underground, Wukong then came across Hong Yi, who we mentioned was a friend of Pilampo and the Dawnstar at the start of the chapter. She then suggested that in order to defeat the centipede Guai, Wukong would need to enlist the help of Bodhisattva Pilampo on Purple Cloud Mountain. Upon flying to her, Pilampo then agreed to help, and returning to the temple, she dispelled the Taoist master's blinding light using her weaver's needle, a weapon that had been forged using the power of her own son's eyes, the Dawnstar. The perfect weapon to be used against this Guai in particular, since chickens and centipedes, same as scorpions, are natural enemies. With the 100-eyed Guai defeated, Pilampo did what every other bodhisattva or Buddha had done before this point, and chose, rather than killing, to take the 100-eyed Taoist master back to Purple Cloud Mountain with her, to serve as a guardian of her land. With the day one, Bajie thought on his lover for a moment. He could, after all, at this point, go and find her. But he knew that to go against the Celestial Court and abandon his quest would merely, in the end, spell more tragedy for the both of them. A love tragedy, as he was foretold to suffer all those years ago. So, Bajie made the tough but necessary choice of pressing on with his companions. And retreating back into the dark, Violet Spider was forced to survive on the flesh of her own dead sisters, which eventually she would replace with 6 daughters of her own. And going by the timeline of things here, 5 of those daughters in fact would already have been born at this point, as it was her 6th daughter, the youngest, whom she had with the Zhu Bajie. But fast forward a ways, and we need to jump for a second into the wider politics of what's going on here in this established world. Remember how I said that the Buddhists and Taoists had this delicate coexistence? Well, never is that more relevant than in this chapter. In basic terms, the gods of Buddhism and Taoism both inhabit the Celestial Court, but occupy varying goals and have differing motives. However, something that they all seem to share a need of in order to survive and maintain their power and immortality is sustenance from the universe, which, in this game, boils down to the simple currency of will, the same thing we use to trade with merchants and unlock new abilities. And will is gathered in a number of ways. For instance, the 9,000-year peaches that Sun Wukong eats at the Celestial Court during Journey to the West would have been simply saturated with will, soaking it up from the universe over all the time it took them to grow. However, a quicker way to harvest will is from other living beings, including and especially Yaoguais, something we do ourselves in fact throughout the game every time we kill an enemy, and the more powerful the Yaoguai, the more will they possess. Also, those pills that we find around the place and can craft serve as a heavily refined form of will, improving our power even more efficiently. Now, in the Celestial Realm, the main refiner of pills is a god called Lord Lao, a mainly Taoist entity with a special 8-trigram furnace, managed by magical fans. Presumably, it would look a bit like a giant version of what Zudog has. We'll come back a lot more to Lord Lao in Chapter 5, but for now, the important thing is that Lord Lao needs more will to be refined in his furnace, craft pills with, and maintain the immortality of the gods. And by this point in the chronology, the Queen Mother of the West, who is a high-ranking Buddhist deity, also shares in Lord Lao's interests. So, back down to the mortal realm, and whilst also under the control of Bodhisattva Pilampo on Purple Cloud Mountain, the Queen Mother of the West presents the 100-eyed Guai with 2 celestial eggs that originate from the Kunlun Mountains up above. Eggs which, outside of their celestial home, would lose many of their magical abilities, taking on more twisted qualities in the mortal realm. The 100-eyed one's true Taoist master, that is Lord Lao, then tasked the centipede Guai to use these eggs to obtain even more will for the heavens, likely as a form of repayment, as the 100-eyed Guai had also been gifted one of Sun Wukong's relics. So, the Guai's first experiment to produce more will was to see what these eggs did when ingested by a god. Now, remember in Chapter 3, the plot point about the Dawnstar going missing? Well, we know for a fact that the Dawnstar was in fact captured, winding up at Purple Cloud Mountain, and being put at the mercy of the 100-eyed Guai. Though the timeline of events for this isn't entirely clear, so the order of this next part is a bit of my speculation, though each of the events themselves did all happen. We know that from the lore entries. So, I think, first of all, the 100-eyed Guai, like all the other main bosses, gained possession of one of Wukong's relics, but he also received the 2 celestial eggs at the same time. Then, with his newfound power, he subdued his former master, Bodhisattva Pilampo, taking her Weaver's Needle weapon from her as he did so. Thus, learning of this transgression against his mother, the Dawnstar descended to Purple Cloud Mountain in order to save her, but is defeated by the 100-eyed Taoist master, who uses the needle that the Dawnstar created against the Dawnstar to slit his throat. The 2 celestial eggs are then brought forth to be used on him, him. Though, as the first egg is brought forward, the Dawnstar coughs blood onto it. The thing inside it hatches and wriggles away. We'll come back to that one later. The second egg is then forced down the Dawnstar's throat, his mind becoming a haze, and his last thoughts simply praying for his mother's survival. Then he transforms into a grotesque cocoon on Purple Cloud Mountain, with strands of it even reaching up to the heavens. And quick side note, because there's also a theory that the Dawnstar was actually first captured by Yellowbrow, the same way Kang Jin's star was. Though personally, I don't believe this theory to be the case, as the journal entry for the Duskvale implies that the Dawnstar was defeated, surprisingly so by his needle, implying he first of all still had the freedom to defend himself when arriving at this place, whilst also the concern for his mother as he died implies he must have definitely known beforehand that she was in trouble. So feel free to discuss these two theories more in the comments, but for the moment at least, my take on this whole thing is what I said before. But jumping back, the Dawnstar's corruption to Duskvale was not the desired effect of these eggs, however, and the 100-eyed Guai was heavily scolded by Lord Lao for his failure. At least he was at first. However, the other egg that accidentally hatched and slithered off would go on to become the Elder Armorworm, a creature capable of laying many more twisted celestial eggs, which when ingested by simpler beings would bestow them with great power by transforming them into various insect-based Yaoguai, which over time spread far and wide throughout the Webbed Hollow. At this point, with an endlessly reproducing supply of eggs and wanting to further experiment on more powerful beings, the Taoist Master then removed the arms from his captive Bodhisattva Pilampo, possibly also killing her in the process, though we never actually see her in-game, so that's up for speculation. With her arms though, he then places an egg into where each of them was severed. The eggs eventually hatch, creating two hand-tailed Guais, simple insect-like beings that for a time catch prey together by clapping them to death, though one of them is eventually eaten by a frog, leaving the other alone to clap against the walls of thin crevices. And the whole transforming everything into Yaoguai's aspect that came from those eggs though, did in fact turn out to be greatly beneficial to Lord Lao, since the Yaoguais produced from these eggs basically metamorphosized weaker beings into stronger ones, which thus contained a lot more will than your average life. So, realizing this, the entire region of the Webbed Hollow and the Temple of Yellow Flowers was repurposed to become something of a celestial will farm. 4 magical seals were put in place to contain the various Yaoguai inside, and the court would routinely harvest handfuls of them for the refinement of Lord Lao's pills. The 100-eyed Taoist Guai even got appointed a manager of sorts from the celestial court called Crane Immortal, who, as far as I can tell, reports directly to Lord Lao. The 100-eyed one, then obligated to produce more Yaoguai, began to twist his Taoist teachings into a means of convincing his disciples to eat the Armorworm X, promising them that it would lead to their ultimate ascension and immortality. And in fairness, since the transformed Yaoguai are then collected as tools for the celestial court and refined into pills, he's not entirely lying about that one, just heavily bending the truth. In fact, since he often sends his disciples to Purple Cloud Mountain to conduct this ritual, perhaps the strings near the Dawnstar are actually the path that they're meant to take to the heavens. Speaking again briefly of the Dawnstar though, the court did actually appoint a student from the Hall of Incense to become the new Dawnstar, citing simply that the old one meddled too closely with the mortal realm, helping out Sun Wukong, and was no longer fit for office. Though, when further pressed, the court pretended that they gave the Dawnstar the freedom to go and pursue whatever life he chose. Yeah, there's a lot of political intrigue actually underpinning this story, and it becomes especially apparent in the lore of this chapter. Now, a few more things do happen before the Destined One arrives at the Hollow, and the first takes place about 100 years prior, where another brother of Erlang Shen, this time called the Venom Taoist, is sent into this region too, to once again test our worth and guide us towards the secret area. All crucial steps for the Destined One to fulfill a far grander and more secretive plot that we'll cover towards the end of the video. Secondly, we come back to the Violet Spider, who's replaced her 6 sisters with her 6 daughters to rule over the Webbed Hollow, and each of the sisters have a crucial role to play down here, together making the region actually fairly prosperous, if not a little bit webby. The Violet Spider herself, now a lot older, mostly leaves the work to the others, but has fallen into the habit of taking seasonal husbands, which she mates with and then eats, because, well, she's a spider, I guess. The first sister actually handles more the maternal role, aiding all of her sisters in their various tasks, whilst the second runs a very successful silk business, trading with the outside and managing a network of merchants. The third sister then weaves the silk, running a workshop of other weaving insects, whilst the fifth sister serves as her stern hand, sealing any workers who don't do a good enough job inside cocoons to be consumed for their food. The fourth sister is more unruly and longs to leave the hollow in which they're trapped by the celestial seals. And finally, the sixth, still young, is, well, Baja's daughter, and scolded some pigwais once when they suggested her father was also a pig, claiming that her mother would never be with someone so despicable. Yeah, I know. Eventually, as I said earlier, the Scorpion Lord would also arrive with his 4 sons at the Webbed Hollow, and the 4 princes would try and fail thereafter to court the 4 spider sisters and marry into their successful business. In fact, in the end, the spider sisters just started feigning minor interest in the princes in order to get them to do things. Meanwhile, their father, the Scorpion Lord, continued his quest to find the Dawnstar and avenge his wife, with his search eventually bringing him to Purple Cloud Mountain. And now we come back to the present. Having just defeated Yellowbrow in the New West, the 100-eyed Guai realizes that they'll be the next destination, so hatches a plan to entrap both the Destined One and Zhubaja by gifting to the Violet Spider both Wukong's relic to lure the two in, as well as the Weaver's Needle from Bodhisattva Pilampo, which is also, in this case, apparently good for muddling the mind of Baja. Despite her reservations, Violet Spider still longs to see Baja, only fully agreeing to the plan on that fact alone. So, Wukong and Zhubaja arrive at the Hollow, fighting the expert at commerce second sister, who immediately sets in motion stage 1 of the plan by using the needle on Zhubaja. This then brings out his more lustful tendencies, and he's brought to the Zhu village to wed the Violet Spider. Now, remember, these weddings usually end in the husband getting eaten, and that is supposed to happen here too. Yet, when it comes down to it, their love has simply transcended too many obstacles over this time, and she cannot bring herself to do it. The Violet Spider, for one of her previous weddings, was also gifted a magical mirror, which, when looked in, would show her her true and original celestial form. Yet, looking into it, she found the reflection to be too painful compared to what she now was, so discarded it in the nearby caves. But, on the eve of her wedding to Baja, she so desperately still wants him despite her advanced years that she applies the same makeup as she had lifetimes ago at the Celestial Court. And even though Baja outright murdered her sisters, which remember she had to feast on, she still cannot escape her longing for him. And Baja too, at least under the influence of the needle, laments us and Wukong for coming between his love, at least until we beat some sense into him. Twice. Then, with the Violet Spider's discarded mirror, which we found in the hand of the Buddha Guai earlier, Baja finally calms down upon seeing his old face, and we retrieve from his head the Weaver's Needle. But the pig is soon captured once again by the Violet Spider, who now hopes to win him over by instead showing him their daughter. But before they get a proper introduction, the Destined One intervenes once again, and enraged that Baja has always chosen monkeys over her, she attacks. We fight, and she of course retreats, setting a literal wave of little spiders to chase after us. But as we flee and almost fall to our death, we are mysteriously and puzzlingly rescued by another of the spider sisters. And I'm like 90% certain, actually, that this is in fact the fourth sister. And to explain why, we'll have to jump back just a tiny bit, as it's easier to explain this whole aspect of the story in one go. You see, back when the Destined One is exploring the Webbed Hollow, the fourth sister laments the fact that she never gets to go and see the outside world, clearly unable to remove the seals that keep her in this place. Though, seeing this, we instead find that we can remove the seals, and begin doing so as we find them throughout the Hollow. So, seeing that we may indeed be the monkey to finally bring about her freedom, I think that the fourth sister saves us in this moment, knowing that we're quite possibly her only hope, lifting us up into the Temple of Yellow Flowers. From here, several of these stories wrap up. We encountered the Venom Taoist, another brother of Erlang's back in the Webbed Hollow, but our final showdown with him takes place up here, where, having proven our combat prowess, he guides us to Purple Cloud Mountain. Here we first of all fight the Taoist Me, another of the 100-eyed Guai's disciples, and the prime example of one that longs to consume the armorworm eggs and ascend to the heavens. There's actually a lot of lore on this character in particular, but none of it's massively relevant to the main story, so I covered him instead in this previous video. Then we can also meet the Scorpion Lord, who came here looking for the Dawnstar, who himself, though now contorted into a monster, resides here still too. In fact, if we don't kill the Scorpion Lord before fighting the Duskvale, the Scorpion Lord will come to get his own slice of justice as well.
I'll bring justice for my wife.
Though, just like his wife did, he falls immediately the second the Dawnstar, or now the Duskvale, first crows.
Forget about his crowing.
But with the Scorpion Lord dead, left to fight this old friend of Wukong's ourself, we finally free him from this torment worse than death. And, after doing so, we'll actually be thanked by Hong Yi, the old friend of Bodhisattva Pilampo, who, growing up, was like a big sister to the Dawnstar. She is, of course, devastated, but ultimately glad that he can rest now. And in fact, the Weaver's Needle that we extracted from Bajie's head earlier had, in fact, over the years diminished in power. But, seeing as it was originally forged from the essence of the Dawnstar, it's only fitting that his body, even though now heavily corrupted, can restore its power once again, giving us a major advantage against the 100-eyed master. But before we get to him, there's one more celestial seal to remove in the temple courtyards, and with that one gone, the Yaoguais will finally be free to leave this place, including the fourth sister. But, of course, messing with the plans of a celestial deity like Lord Lao has severe and immediate repercussions. Meet the Supreme Inspector, a guy who loves to grass people up so much that nobody dares be friends with him or even speak to him for fear of saying the wrong thing. A guy who is so loyal to the Jade Emperor that his head was in fact replaced with a copy of the Emperor's right hand, signifying him to almost be an extension of the Emperor himself. But worst of all, as I mentioned earlier, it was this guy who actually grassed up Tianpeng, or Zhu Bajie, for doting over Chang'e, and forced him to become a pig. But today, the Supreme Inspector is here not on the Jade Emperor's behalf, but rather Lord Lao's, because I guess Lord Lao too can see the value of keeping a lackey like this on his side. But just as the Supreme Inspector is about to end the life of this Destined One, the Celestial Court come up with a better idea, now sending Crane Immortal, the Taoist Master's regular liaison, down to deliver it.
Stop! Spare his life!
Stop. Spare his life.
Yeah, I know the lines matching is probably just a coincidence, but I found it funny.
Foul monkey! No matter how many times you reincarnate, you're still blind to the ways of this world. Now, in your folly, you've hindered the dealings of the court. But above that, you've given a girl who knows no limits a false hope. I shall transform her into a mighty golden pill and keep it safe for you. Think about her, won't you? Should you feel like stirring trouble in your next life?
And with that, the Celestial Court may have lost the bars to their Yaoguai prison farm, but they may have gained something potentially far more valuable. This will probably become a bit clearer by chapter 6 or 7, but effectively, the Celestial Court have now taken the soul of the fourth sister, storing her as a pill. You'll notice, in fact, that she is absent from the end of the chapter. Now, it's not entirely clear why the Destined One should care about this Guai woman, but in their scenes together, the two clearly do share some sort of underlying bond, perhaps mirroring that of the one between Bajie and the Violet Spider. So even if by the end of the game we do manage to free ourselves from the influence of the Celestial Court, again, more the theme of chapters 6 and 7, the court in this case will still have the fourth sister as a bargaining chip. And if Wukong or the Destined One misbehaves in a future life, they can hurt her to punish him. And just to speculate a little bit further, but with talks of DLC on the way for this game, I see honestly no better setup across all of these 6 chapters than this little side quest right here. And if you are watching this in the future and I'm right, then I don't know, like the video or something if you haven't already. Thanks. But finally, with the 100-eyed Taoist Master's 2-stage plan having utterly failed, first because of Violet Spider's love and then because of our skill, this giant purple dude is basically like,
fine. I'll do it myself.
And despite it being the only thing keeping the now aged Violet Spider alive, he rips the relic back out of her and transforms himself into his full form, before revealing what his actual motive has been this whole time.
This, along with those relics inside him, shall free me of Kunlun's reign.
Yep, just like us, this dude only wants his freedom, but sadly for him, he's not gonna get it. And with the help of the now enraged Spider Sisters and the Weaver's Needle reinvigorated from the body of the Dawnstar, the Destined One defeats the 100-eyed Taoist Master. Though without Bodhisattva Pilampo around anymore, it's actually unclear what happens to him after this. The Violet Spider though, now stripped of the thing keeping her alive, dies. Bajie looks across the field to what is indeed his daughter before turning away and joining the monkey.
You haven't changed a bit. You fool.
Once again, mostly because of how closely the Celestial Court are watching him, Bajie cannot risk forming any connections with those he cares about. And much as he may wish in this moment to go and comfort his daughter, he dare not. After all, as we've seen many times already and will see many times again, the Celestial Court does not mess about when it comes to transgressions against them, an aspect of the story that's going to become even more central as we get on to Chapter 5. Kicking off Chapter 5, we need to once again return to the distant past, in a far-off kingdom, well, 2 far-off kingdoms actually, one of which was inhabited by these horned people called the Yakshas, and the other by towering giants, the Sea Rakshasa. At some point in the past, the Buddha decreed that the Yaksha kingdom needed to be utterly eradicated, sending down his celestial soldiers to annihilate the realm and drive any survivors east into exile. In fact, Yakshas are a common enemy type in Chapter 3 especially, for this very reason. At the same time, because the Rakshasa shared a common origin with the Yakshas, Buddha said that they ultimately had to go too. Now, it's not fully clear why he hated these people so much. Maybe the Yakshas staged a rebellion against the heavens, that's kind of implied, but there's also mention of them being powered by a slightly different form of will, with descendants of the Rakshasa especially growing smaller under our less compatible form of will. So maybe the will that they generated couldn't be consumed by the gods as well, or something. That's my theory anyway. But either way, the 2 kingdoms were eradicated, and on the final day, the Yaksha king sat in his hall as enemies closed in, holding in his arms his recently deceased son. At this point, Lord Lao entered his hall, offering the king a deal, a means by which he could save his son. The king, seeing no further chance at salvation, agreed, and Lord Lao bound the soul of the Yaksha prince inside a lotus flower. The Yaksha king then sacrificed his own life to keep his son's essence from dissipating, and the lotus flower was then placed into the river of childbearing. A river that, if drunk from, will make you pregnant. That's actually fairly self-explanatory. As the Rakshasa kingdom was then destroyed at the same time, a Rakshasa princess, called conveniently Rakshasi, fled eastward, escorted by her entourage of giant sea Rakshasas. She too was part of Lord Lao's plan, who invited her to the Celestial Court to serve under him in Tushita Palace, making sure that she practiced both Buddhism and Taoism to prove she was playing along with all sides of the court. And by the way, jumping back to Chapter 4 for just a second, Bodhisattva Pilampo, mother of the Dawnstar, was actually a member of the Rakshasa race as well, which I think explains just why the 100-eyed Guai got away with destroying her and her son, with seemingly no reprimand from the court. But back to Rakshasi, and she was brought to the hall of Lord Lao, where she met who would become the Keeper of the Flaming Mountains, as he's called in-game. But at this point, he was simply the young Taoist servant that would fan Lord Lao's 8-trigram pill furnace. Now, Lord Lao introduced Rakshasi to him as his senior, which initially made the Keeper jealous, feeling inferior to her, though he used it as an excuse to make her fan the flames. However, displeased by the fan she was given, Rakshasi pleaded with Lord Lao for a better one. One, and thus Lord Lao forged her a very powerful Iron Plantain fan. Remember that, as it'll be a very important plot point shortly. The Keeper, impressed by Rakshasi's initiative, grew to like her after that, and the two grew pretty close. This is where we then return to Sun Wukong. Long before he embarked on their journey this time, before his 500-year imprisonment under the mountain even, Sun Wukong was simply the handsome and powerful Monkey King, who, having attained many abilities from his training with Puti Zushi, or Patriarch Bodhi, as he's actually called in-game, wandered the lands making friends. In time, Sun Wukong grew especially close with 6 like-minded individuals, whom he named Swan Brothers. One among them was a powerful bull, who, much like Wukong, had incredibly lofty aspirations and also named himself a great sage, just as Wukong did. Later, Wukong went to the celestial heavens and, among other things, ate some peaches, which take 9,000 years to grow and contain immense amounts of power. I think I mentioned them in Chapter 4. Then, after learning that he hadn't been invited to the banquet where they were supposed to be consumed, he trashed and ruined that as well. The Celestial Court were understandably pissed off at the arrogance of this monkey and sent a huge army to deal with him and his brothers. Though, with his power now grown so much, especially after eating the peaches, the army proves no match for Wukong and his sworn brothers, including the Bull King. Finally, as a last resort, the court drop their specialist unit, Erlang Shen, into the fight, who proves one-on-one to be an even match for Wukong. In the end though, the monkey is only defeated by intervention from Lord Lao himself. Then, knocked out, the court attempts to kill Sun Wukong by placing him into Lord Lao's celestial pill furnace to be melted down. But after 49 days trapped inside, Wukong emerges unscathed, and in fact, his body has even become more refined and more powerful, gifting him his fiery golden eyes. In his subsequent rampage, Wukong then knocks over the 8 Trigram furnace, and some of the embers fall to the mortal realm. The place that they land then becomes the Flaming Mountains. However, since the Keeper was in charge of the furnace at this point, he is blamed for Wukong's escape, being banished from Lao's servitude and sent down to Earth to become the Keeper of the Flaming Mountains, the place that, I guess by their logic, he would have been responsible for creating. And, having grown close with Rakshasi during their time together, she in fact offered to aid him in the mortal realm, where she still already spent plenty of her time, settled down in a cave within the place that became the Flaming Mountains. Sun Wukong, as we know, is eventually stopped on his rampage by the Buddha himself and imprisoned under a mountain for 500 years. During this time, the Bull King also would wind up moving to the Flaming Mountains, becoming the region's powerful Yaoguai king. This, again, attracted the attention of Lord Lao, who decided it would be a good idea for Rakshasi to marry the Bull King. This made the Keeper jealous, of course, and he was just left, I guess, simping on the sidelines. However, Lord Lao's plan for Rakshasi, it turns out, had actually been far grander and more twisted by nature. Remember how I said that the Yaksha and Rakshasa shared a common origin? Well, what this meant was that Rakshasi was actually a prime being capable of rebirthing the Yaksha prince. You know, the one whose soul was bound into a lotus flower. So, Lord Lao forced Rakshasi to drink from the river of childbearing, and I presume 9 months later, she gave birth to Hellboy. I mean Red Boy, the reincarnation of the Yaksha prince. Now, Lord Lao doesn't particularly care if she serves as a true mother to the boy. He simply asks that she raises him to adulthood. It seems not everyone at the Celestial Court was fully on board with the eradication of the Yaksha people, and whatever their transgression against Buddhism was, Lord Lao, for his own self-interested reasons, wishes for their royal line to continue. And whilst the Bull King understands that Rakshasi has to do what her all-powerful master bids, he's still not totally cool with the whole thing. I guess, like Wukong, he doesn't want to feel like his life is being controlled by the gods. That's why, when he was later approached by the wealthy Princess Fairfox, the Bull King departs from his wife Rakshasi, leaving her safe in Bishwi Cave, guarded by his Bishwi golden-eyed beast, with now mostly just the Keeper to help Rakshasi raise the demon child. The Bull King then takes Princess Fairfox as his concubine, his mistress, and together they too have a child named Ping Ping. Though the Bull King didn't remain completely absent from the life of his first wife and their son, still visiting relatively often. Otherwise, Red Boy was mostly taken care of by the Keeper, who taught him the technique of Samadhi Fire, an exceptionally powerful tool capable of causing grievous harm to even the most powerful of Celestials. In fact, this fire's threat to Celestial beings may even be another reason why the Yakshas were eradicated in the first place. gods. Though the Keeper explains that he was teaching Red Boy this technique not to be used as an external weapon, but as a means for Red Boy to refine his inner elixir. Again, possibly a plot of Lord Lao's, suggesting perhaps that the will of Yakshias can make powerful weapons for the gods. Another reason, perhaps, to add to the pile of why they were eradicated. Now, 100 years after Red Boy's birth, it was his 100th birthday. I mean, obviously. Though in spite of his advanced age, he was still a child, both in stature and temperament. And despite wanting to go and play on his birthday, the Keeper insisted that he must continue practicing his Samadhi fire. So, instead, Red Boy channeled his fire's power into 5 tools, 5 extensions of the Samadhi fire that were also capable of spewing it, which he called the 5 element carts, representing wood, water, fire, earth, and gold. Now, the Keeper was displeased at the boy's disobedience, and this probably went against Lord Lao's plans for Red Boy, whilst the Bull King, actually impressed by his son's ingenuity, commissioned the carts to be made even bigger, and thereafter they became almost like companions for Red Boy, and eventually developed a sentience of their own, becoming formidable, if bizarre, mountain Guais. Now, this brings us back to the Journey of the West timeline. Red Boy, by his core nature, ultimately grows into a particularly unruly child, and when he chances upon the group of journeyers, he, like so many other Yaoguais before and after him, senses the immense levels of immortality contained within Tang Sanzang. He too desires to consume the monk's flesh and take on this power for himself. So he disguises himself as a regular child, and pretending to have been robbed, suspends himself from a tree and begs for help. Soon Wukong, as usual, sniffs through the whole ruse, and Tang Sanzang, as usual, insists on helping all the same. They cut the boy down, and Wukong is made to carry him. Wukong agrees to carry the boy, as it gives him the chance to kill this Yaoguai deceiver. Though, before he can do so, Red Boy casts a spell, similar to Pluck of Many, leaving Wukong to smash a fake body to pieces, as Red Boy turns into his red cloud and whisks away Tang Sanzang. Yes, Tang Sanzang is kidnapped again. Seriously, this dude's got like a worse track record than Princess Peach. Seeking help, again, soon Wukong finds this time the Keeper of the Flaming Mountains. The Keeper then explains that Red Boy is the son of the Bull King, making him, I guess, Wukong's sworn nephew? And realizing this, attempting to use his new connection to straighten the whole thing out, Wukong and Zhubaja went to seek out Red Boy. But despite the connection, they were still forced to fight not just against him, but against all 5 of his element cards too. And alas, since the Samadhi fire had such power to harm even the grandest immortals, Wukong and Baja retreated to seek more help. And since the dragons in this realm were known to have the power to summon rain, Wukong sought out the 4 dragon kings, who offered their aid too, only to learn that this Samadhi fire was inconveniently impervious to water. In fact, it only enhanced the fire's strength, creating 2 searing hot smoke. Soon Wukong is hit in his golden eyes by the billowing smoke and forced to flee once again. In fact, the fire is powerful enough in this state to almost kill him. And when we bear in mind that this monkey survived 49 days inside Lord Lao's pill furnace, it again, I think, lends credence to the theory that the Yaksha were killed due to having this power, and that Lord Lao kept the prince alive, as he coveted such power for himself. Baja, seeing Wukong routed, decides they need the help of someone even more powerful, and retreats to find Bodhisattva Guanyin, the same Bodhisattva who helped defeat and then recruited the Black Bear Guai back in Chapter 1. Though Red Boy predicts Baja's plan, disguises himself as Guanyin, because he's actually pretty good at disguises, and captures Baja as well. Red Boy, then planning to feast on the flesh of Tang Sanzang, summons his father, the Bull King, to come and join, no doubt attempting to impress his somewhat distant dad. But Wukong, doing some thinking ahead of his own, then disguises himself as his old brother, and gets led back to the cave where his companions are being held. Though Red Boy, unfortunately, immediately sees through Wukong's ruse, prompting the monkey to flee once again, though this time Red Boy pursues, and Wukong leads him all the way back to the real Bodhisattva Guanyin. Red Boy, unperturbed at the notion of fighting a Bodhisattva too, engages Guanyin in combat, and this mighty Bodhisattva actually flees, Red Boy laughs at his easy victory and apparent power before mockingly sitting on Guanyan's lotus throne. But as he does, it transforms into knives and pierces through his legs, the knives then morphing into hooks to prevent his escape. Red Boy is finally captured, though knowing himself how this game goes, he surrenders to Guanyan and explains he now wants to convert to Buddhism. Guanyan, only all too happy to receive a new, powerful disciple, frees him, only for Red Boy to attack yet again, forcing Guanyan to then entrap him with not 1 but 5 encaging bands. 1 for his head, 2 for his wrists, and 2 for his feet. Now remember that the Black Bear Guai only needed 1 of these headbands from Guanyan, again alluding to Red Boy's much greater level of power. Soon Wukong himself did only need 1 headband to control him too, admittedly, but that one was placed by the almighty Buddha himself, so was no doubt much more powerful. But with Red Boy finally captured, he's now taken back to become yet another disciple of hers, alongside the Black Bear Guai. And across that time, the two Yaoguai did sort of become friends. And it also explains why Red Boy is there in the Black Bear Guai's journal entry. With Red Boy dealt with, the journeyers press onwards, only to find their passage through the Flaming Mountains now completely blocked by more unextinguishable flames. Now, remember back in Lord Lao's palace, Rakshasi was given an iron plantain fan? Well, when returning to the mortal realm to live in the Flaming Mountains, she brought that fan with her, finding that in the mortal realm, it had the power to generate immense winds and also rain. She then became something of a rain goddess in the area, and nearby villages would offer tributes, which also included the barbaric sacrifice of their elders over 60 in the hope it would result in more rainfall. Though, the whole time, Rakshasi simply distributed the rain, as needed in accordance with the seasons regardless. And in fact, this even earned her the name Princess Iron Fan across the region. So, when Wukong found them unable to pass through the flames, he knew there was only one tool with the power to open the way for their journey. So seeks out Princess Iron Fan, Rakshasi, in order to borrow her famed Iron Plantain fan. Though, because of the fate already inflicted upon her son, Rakshasi understandably and angrily straight up refused. Instead, she used the fan against Wukong, and he gets blown thousands of miles away. Though, by transforming into a bird, or using his cloud, or some such method, Wukong soon returns, and Rakshasi attempts the same tactic again, though this time is countered by the Wind Tamer vessel. You know, the thing from Chapter 2? And this caused Rakshasi to flee. Wukong then hid as an insect in her tea, and snuck his way into her stomach. Using the same tactics that he'd later employ against Yellowbrow, this chapter actually took place a little earlier on their journey. Relenting under the immense pain, Rakshasi finally surrenders her iron fan. But Wukong soon finds out that this doesn't actually extinguish the flames, and therefore must be a fake. So he's forced to try and get the fan yet again. And realizing that Rakshasi was also the wife of his sworn brother, the Bull King, Wukong went to find his brother, who now mostly spent his days hanging out with his fox Guai concubine, Princess Fairfox. Though, because Princess Fairfox doesn't take kindly to Wukong's intrusion in their cave, and because Wukong earlier had Red Boy captured, as well as assaulting the Bull King's first wife in one bid to secure the fan, the Bull King, understandably, was pissed off at his old brother, and rather than agreeing to help, the two instead end up fighting. Though, this gets broken up when a messenger arrives and invites the Bull King to a party, hosted by a Dragon King. The Bull King was like, screw this, I want to go get drunk, and left atop his mount, the Bishwi golden-eyed beast that had earlier been used to guard Rakshasi's cave. This gave Wukong another idea, and whilst his former brother reveled alongside dragons, Wukong transformed into the bull, stole his mount, and returned atop it to Rakshasi, tricking her into not only giving him the real fan, but also teaching him how to use it. Before he could clear the flames though, the Bull King, discovering his mount gone from the party, and guessing what had happened, stormed back to Rakshasi, only to find Wukong had already succeeded. So, adopting the same tactics as his former brother, the Bull King transformed into Zubaja, whom, gloating and pleased with himself, Wukong happily handed the fan over to. Though, soon after realizing that he too had been deceived, the Bull and Monkey Kings once again fought, finding themselves equally matched. Though, when the real Bajie leapt in to help Wukong, the Bull King was forced to retreat, and ran back to the cave of his concubine, Princess Fairfox. Wukong and Bajie then followed, fighting off her forces in the cave as well. The Bull King is then once again forced to flee from the cave, pursued by Wukong, who finally subdues him out in the open of the Flaming Mountains, wherein the monkey, who'd only become more bitter since becoming bound by his own encaging headband, cruelly gloated over all his victories against his former brother.
Your brother, I've disciplined. Your boy, I've given away. Your wife's fan. Today, I'll take it with me too. Find a master and serve the right. It's the only path left for the likes of us. Don't you understand, brother?
That last part, in fact, speaks a lot to the wider plot going on here. See, Wukong wouldn't necessarily have wanted to do all of these things, but since the Celestials have complete control over him with the encaging headband, and had previously punished him to 500 years of imprisonment, what choice does Wukong really have against such an unrelenting power? So what he says here to the Bull King is actually a warning that the only way powerful Yaoguai like them will be allowed to live with some level of freedom is by allowing themselves to become the tools of the Celestial Court. But whilst Wukong and the Bull King had taken the fight outside, Bajie, before following, had made sure to kill the Bull King's concubine, and found this whole cruel ordeal a little bit too hilarious.
Wukong! I took out the bull's concubine with a whack of my rake too! Turned out, she was a fox, Guai!
On hearing of the death of his lover, the Bull King is so enraged that he transforms into his ginormous, true, and incredibly powerful body, something that Wukong too would eventually prove capable of, but we'll get to that later. Proving unable to defeat the Bull King themselves whilst he's in this form, the Jade Emperor, realizing how much trouble the Bull King could cause like this, actually sent help directly from the Celestial Court. Meet Neja, a fire-wheel-riding deity, and his father Li Jing, whose handheld pagoda has the power to entrap any Yaoguai. In a truly epic showdown, the Bull King is finally forced to submit, his wife handing over the Iron Plantain fan. The companions can continue on their journey, and though the Bull King should at this point nurture a deeply seething hatred for his once sworn brother, which he no doubt now does a bit, I think he understood those words that Wukong said to him, as he does after this find a master and serve the right, converting to Buddhism. Now, sometime later, when Red Boy was still a disciple of Bodhisattva Guanyin, he accompanied her to the Yellowwind Ridge, where she had some business to discuss with the Bodhisattva Lingji. Red Boy was left in the Stone Guai Valley whilst the two Bodhisattvas talked, and there he beheld the Stone Vanguard, being very impressed by its towering might. Committing the Guai's form into memory, he departed the ridge and never forgot it. Now, let's fast forward to the events after Journey to the West. Some of this we'll explore in more detail in Chapter 6, but put simply, Sun Wukong achieved Buddhahood. The encaging headband, as far as he was concerned, was removed, and he was permitted to spend his days reveling in the Celestial Court. But after a while of revelry, Wukong grew tired of immortality, and returned instead to the simple life he once had on Mount Huaguo. The court, though, unwilling to let Wukong live outside of their control, fearful of the power he'd attained, came down to stop him, punishing his transgression by killing other monkeys and leveling his beloved mountain. In the subsequent fight against Erlang Shen, the headband is revealed to still be on his head, and at this point I think Wukong finally understands there truly is no escaping the influence of these gods. Though, a part that we don't see in the opening scene is how various Yaoguai, the main ones in fact that we've been fighting throughout this game, as well as the Bull King, actually aided in the true defeat of Sun Wukong. The Bull King held Wukong in his arms as he lay dying, and the monkey uttered his final words.
The way I saw it, with enough merit and a position before the Buddha, they would leave me be, and all of you as well. Now I see, for someone like me, staying alive is enough to be a transgression. Brother, take care of your wife and children, and remember, steer clear of my remains.
Tragically, Wukong hoped that through his toils he would have finally earned his freedom. But he was wrong, and as he died, his power split into the 6 relics, which Erlang then divided up.
You've atoned through deeds, Black Bear. Take this pair of eyes. You've served the righteous cause, Yellow Rat. These ears are yours. Your power has gathered anew, Yellowbrow. Keep this nose. You've endured hardships on the eye. Go with the tongue. And the bull, it is the hardest to turn against a sworn brother. You can have his body.
Again, this is all part of a much wider and grander plot, or perhaps even a plot within a plot, and again, we'll return to a lot of it in Chapter 6. After Wukong's death though, Bull King was permitted to return to the Flaming Mountains, and since Wukong had warned him to steer clear of his remains, i.e. not use the relic in any way, lest it bring harm to him like it did all the other Guais, the Bull King hides it in his stomach, awaiting a time to return it to the right person, the Destined One. Again, big plot point to explain all in one go later. Once home, he lives for a time in harmony with Rakshasi and the daughter he had with Princess Fairfox, Ping Ping, whom Rakshasi had, without bitterness or remorse, adopted fully into the family. A while later, Bodhisattva Guanyin also permitted Red Boy to return to his home in the Flaming Mountains, and they became a happy family of 4. Plus the Keeper, who's still kind of just jealously there. Also, as he did in all the other regions, Erlang sends down another brother of his, this time called the Pale Axe Stalwart, to await the Destined One's return and guide him towards the secrets of this region. But as the years press on, the Bull King begins to slowly weaken and grow sick. The Keeper, ever perceptive, deduces that this is a result of the relic he holds. With Wukong's body and the Bull King's mind intertwined, their mixed history together becomes like invisible shackles for the Bull King, ever dragging him further and further down. To compensate for his loss in power, he then promotes the Pale Axe Stalwart to become his vanguard and build up his forces. Red Boy, also wanting to contribute to his father's army, recalls now the Stone Vanguard that he beheld many years ago at Yellowwind Ridge, and describing its complete shape to the Keeper constructs for him a fiery replicant Flint Vanguard, which sits thereafter as a mountain guardian. He also constructs a bunch of lesser stone Guais, but Red Boy is unimpressed by his extra initiative, and they're instead all cast down into the Furnace Valley. Red Boy learns of the relic his father now holds, and fearing for the Bull King's declining health, requests that the relic be given to him. The Bull King says no, and not to bring it up again. But over time, Red Boy begins to have dreams. He dreams that he once had immense power and was able to kill a lot of bad people at once. But then, he began to see people watching him from above in the sky. And the dream ends with the sky people killing him, turning him into a red lotus flower. His mother then picks the flower, and he becomes her child once more. Of course, the dreams that Red Boy is having are in fact memories from his previous life, and eventually Red Boy arrives at the full realization. Possibly just assessing the nature of his form, he finally realizes completely who he really is, a tiefling. A Yaksha prince, reincarnated. With his newfound knowledge, Red Boy's desire for the relic only grew. Knowing now that the Celestial Court had ordered the full extermination of his people, he yearned desperately for revenge. But the Bull King, only too aware of what the court can do to those who don't fall in line, locks his son up, for lack of a better idea, and orders his mount, the Bishwi Golden-Eyed Beast, to guard him.
You're all cute. You knew who I was from the start. Why'd you choose to be their lapdog? I never wanted to sever our ties. If kinship means anything to you, give me that relic and let me avenge my people.
But after this, Red Boy manages to escape, only to be caught and captured by the Golden-Eyed Beast. When the Bull King finds them on the mountains, the beast has his son pinned, and fearing for his own boy's safety, the Bull King is forced to wound his old mount, driving it away into the mountains. Though feigning injury is all too common a tactic for Red Boy, and with his father now distracted worrying after his mount, Red Boy attacked him with the Samadhi Fire. This injured the Bull King to such a degree that he turned once again back into to his giant form. Now severely weakened both by the relic and his son, he was incapacitated in the center of the flaming mountains. Yet still, the Bull King refused to give up the relic, forcing Red Boy into resorting to a yet more cunning plan. You see, in the events leading up to his imprisonment by the Bull King, Red Boy had also lured his sister, Ping Ping, into the mountains. There, he tested her skill with a game of chase before knocking her unconscious and hiding her away somewhere, taking on her guise as a deception thereafter. Around this time, we, the Destined One, also arrive at the Flaming Mountains, and after a brief encounter with the Pale Axe Stalwart, brother of Erlang Shen, who strongly suggests that we go and deal with Red Boy's 5-element carts, hint hint, we then encounter Ping Ping, who, just like Red Boy in Journey to the West, is first found hanging from a tree and begging for help, under assault from Red Boy's captains quick as fire and fast as wind. In life, these two had been ruffians for the execution block, but when faced with death, had used a form of ancient magic to continue on as severed heads and float away. But with them defeated, Ping Ping transforms via a red mist, dead giveaway, into quite possibly this video's thumbnail, depending on how the thumbnail testing goes. Ping Ping then explains that it was Red Boy who subdued their father and mother, who both now desperately need our help. She's also surprisingly and unnaturally civil to Bajie, who, if you remember, killed her mother. Bajie doesn't quite buy this whole ruse, but lets it lie for now, and Ping Ping hurries us along to find her father, explaining that in order to extinguish the flames ahead, they'll once again need Rakshasi's Iron Plantain Fan, which I guess Wukong returned the first time around after using. Seems a lot like those two were being needlessly stubborn back then, in fact. But doubting that Rakshasi will give us the fan to be used against Red Boy, Ping Ping goes to find the Keeper of the Flaming Mountains to convince her, sending us on to the Emerald Hall. But Bajie gets there first. Now, once we arrive, we eavesdrop on a meeting between Rakshasi and Ping Ping, and the Keeper of the Flaming Mountains. Rakshasi refuses to give up the fan, but more importantly, the ever-perceptive Keeper, having just been told that the Destined One has returned to this place, actually sees pretty clearly much of what's going on behind the scenes here.
I heard the Destined One had obtained all the other relics. Rakshasi, your situation is grave. Do you not see who mandated his return? Were those relics really bestowed for your good? Perhaps amid these schemes and plots, we've unwittingly become stepping stones for his rebirth.
And, in fairness, the Keeper has about summed up a lot of the underlying plot here, because of course, such great and immense power was never going to be just given away to the likes of Yaoguais as a reward. The court would never allow for such a thing. Instead, their wider plan was by sending numerous monkeys over the years on the journey to retrieve the relics that eventually the Destined One would emerge, proving himself worthy by defeating each of the empowered Yaoguai in turn. Eventually, when a Destined One does gather each of Wukong's relics, soon Wukong will have effectively been reincarnated. Maybe not in mind, but definitely in power. And why on earth would the Celestial Court desire the return of such a troublesome monkey? Well, that will be fully explained in Chapter 6. Though, the important thing here is that the court placed such relics into the hands of these troublesome Guais because the Guais were expendable. Because it didn't much matter if the Destined One came and defeated or even killed them. The Keeper, smartly, sees this truth. Yet within such dire truths, he also sees an opportunity for himself.
All along, you are all I care for. I say we should leave together. I vow to treasure you dearly, just like when we're up there.
I never thought that one day you'd be the only one I can rely on. I am overwhelmed. Come, sit with me, and tell me what to do.
Don't let him, Mother! Don't you see? He's taking advantage of you!
But, quite hilariously, this isn't really Rakshasi. We'll get back to where she's actually gone shortly, but this is Bajie, who, as I mentioned, got here first, found the hall empty, and took the form of Rakshasi. The Keeper then yells at Bajie in Shakespeare.
You abhorrent fraud! My candid words were wasted on your foul ears!
Then he makes us fight his special fish, which is said to have the power to create plagues and destroy villages, and with that done, we press up the mountain, carefully dodging around a giant rolling metal boulder to be reunited with Ping Ping, who conveniently has found the plantain fan. It was just lying on the floor there, I guess. Ping Ping then proves it's definitely the legitimate fan and not another fake one, because how else could it possibly be capable of extinguishing the Samadhi fires? You know, the fires that Red Boy has control over? Yeah, if it's not clear enough, this is actually Red Boy, extinguishing the flames with magic and pretending it's being done by the fan, all in a ploy to get us to trust Ping Ping and to take us to the Bull King. But before we do that, there's the small matter still of the 5 element cards that Pale Axe Stalwarts commissioned us to destroy, with the last one found down a secret path opened when Jubaje stops the boulder. Sadly, the Stalwart is killed by this card, but succeeds at the last in the mission Erlang sent him for, to guide us to Bishwi Cave, where we can once again travel to the past, defeat the 2 halves of the boulder from before, which is actually a pair of exiled Yakshas taken in by Rakshasi, and then defeat the Bishwi Golden-Eyed Beast back when it guarded over Rakshasi and Red Boy. We then get to witness Red Boy as an infant and behold the true context surrounding his birth, before traveling back to the future and heading up to retrieve the 5th relic from the Bull King. Meanwhile, at the Heavenly Thunderclap Temple, the real Rakshasi has gone to find Bodhisattva Guanyin, the former master of Red Boy. You see, Rakshasi now finally realizes just why Red Boy was returned to their family. Just like all the other regions and all the other relics, the Destined One needs to be put through worthy trials. We aren't the only monkey sent on this journey, and only through facing such challenges will the true Destined One emerge. Thus, Red Boy was returned, with the deliberate intention that he would sow chaos in the region in order to challenge the Destined One. In fact, the dreams he had after returning home may have even been placed by the gods themselves. Thus, in consenting to this plan to return Red Boy, Bodhisattva Guanyin allowed ruin to fall upon Rakshasi's family. And now, Rakshasi has come for revenge, but stood before Guanyin, about to unleash the power of her plantain fan, she hears, down below, the flames on the mountain being extinguished. In this moment, she instead resorts to begging Guanyin for help, to recapture her son and ensure no harm comes to him or the rest of her family. But Guanyin, possibly also forced to adhere to the wider celestial plan, refuses, and Rakshasi is forced to return home alone. As we and Ping Ping approach the Bull King, she begs him to hand over the relic to us. With it back in the hands of the Destined One, Red Boy will no more have the power to avenge his people. But of course, as we know, this is not Ping Ping. And fortunately, the Bull King realizes this too, as Ping Ping had never had to feign her respect for him. With Red Boy's ruse sussed out, as he transforms back to his true form, he threatens to burn us both to cinders. But quickly subdued by our skill, though no doubt soon to reawaken, the Bull King hurriedly returns the relic to the Destined One, though once again only to fall for the tricks of Red Boy.
Thanks to this false death talisman. Poor keeper. Seems his legacy was his only offer after all.
Finally, with the power of the relic in hand, Red Boy can come into his final form as the Yaksha King, can, in his demon form, finally wage war against the heavens and avenge the destruction of his homeland, can finally fulfill the hopes his father gave up his soul for so long ago. But, naive like a child, his ambition underestimates the true power of the gods.
I'll conquer what divine will conquer. Son Wukong, fear to slay! I will make sure everything that stands in my way dies!
To be honest, if those were also the ideas of the original Yaksha King, then that would definitely explain more why the Buddhas decided that the Yaksha people had to be destroyed. Still, in this case, the Yaksha can't even defeat a 2/3 empowered Wukong, so make of that what you will. And with Red Boy properly defeated this time, Rakshasi in this moment returns, pleading for her son's life as she cites his twisted origin and offers once again her fan in exchange for his life. But what life would Red Boy return to should he be spared? A life of further submission to the Celestial? Perhaps a grander or more material plot to refine his essence into a tool for Lord Lao's benefit. In this moment, Red Boy realizes he will never exact revenge because that was never the destiny Lord Lao had planned for him. And just like Sun Wukong, Red Boy realizes that for as long as he's alive, he'll forever be under their control.
That light lies in our submission, kneeling and begging. You shall never witness it.
His only way out is to die, returning his essence to the wider universe where the gods should bother him no more. And do you know what? He isn't the first to have resorted to this solution, and soon we will have the total and complete truth of what really happened to Sun Wukong. And with that, it's on to Chapter 6. But of course, as with every chapter, there's some former context we need to establish first. Though this chapter's a little smaller in terms of contextual scope, and mostly revolves around the life of Sun Wukong, with the entire area around Mount Huaguo now almost being like a museum or a shrine to him. But going back a ways, in fact going back to Chapter 1 of Journey to the West, where a celestial event between heaven and earth created atop Mount Huaguo a cluster of celestial stone. One day, imbued with power, this stone erupted to produce a stone egg, and from it transformed a stone monkey. And witness to this event at the time was a mandrill, the mandrill chief, as she's referred to in-game. And from her, the monkey who would become Wukong learned to mimic, crawl, and walk, before being introduced by her to the other monkeys. One day, the monkeys set a challenge. Whomsoever could pass through the nearby waterfall would become their king. And the stone monkey, being the only one who succeeded in doing so, was thus crowned the handsome Monkey King. Meanwhile, the remaining celestial stone cast down from Mount Huaguo in the explosion continued to absorb the essences of the sun and moon for a further 1,000 years. And as its power grew, it became a mountain-sized Yaoguai of boundless power. Within this time, after about 300 to 500 years, the stone monkey himself began to ruminate over the concept of death, becoming fearful of it and longing to achieve immortality. The mandrill chief thus directed him to find Patriarch Bodhi, who taught the stone monkey many skills, including his 72 transformations and his somersault cloud. Upon the stone monkey's return, the mandrill chief was then made one of his generals, returning to the giant stone Guai for a second though, and eventually that thing had a fleshy Buddha head placed upon it, which absorbed the stone's will, and the stone, desperately vying for more, then sapped all essence and life from the surrounding area, making it barren. As the stone's power grew, so then too did the Buddha heads, until within the Buddha head's eye grew the skanda of consciousness, one of 5 Buddhist concepts said to together make up a human being, the other 4 being named in this game as form, feeling, thought, and choice. These will be important a little later. Now, fast forward again through all the events of Journey to the West this time until we arrive at the end. The scriptures are sound, Sun Wukong is pronounced a Buddha, and his encaging headband, at least as far as he can tell, is removed. With boundless power and endless revelry at their feet, Wukong and Bajie are free to enjoy eternity at the Celestial Court. Yet Wukong remains unsatisfied. One day, the Yin Tiger, one of the zodiac deities and master of the forge in the Hall of Yuanshen, received a visit from Sun Wukong, who threw down some armor at Yin Tiger's feet and requested it to be improved. Yin Tiger, who knew full well the power of Wukong's golden armor, questioned why he was bothering with such a bland-seeming set of scrap metal, to which Wukong puzzlingly instructed Yin Tiger just to hold onto it. He didn't actually have to work on the armor, but just use that as an excuse if anyone asked. Yin Tiger, seeing something of an elaborate ruse taking place, refused, but Wukong opened his gourd and began a night of drinking. By the end of the night, the monkey had to be drunkenly carried home by the celestial officials, conveniently leaving the armor he'd brought with him behind. That armor, it turns out, was in fact his golden armor, and at some point after Wukong's death, the Yin Tiger would ensure its return to Mount Huaguo. But before that, Wukong shared one final night of drinks with Bajie, wherein they reflected on their journey. Bajie was delighted in their freedom to drink to their heart's content, whilst Wukong was simply glad at being being freed from Tan Zhang's engaging band chants. Though even now, Wukong reflected that he wasn't truly free. If the Celestial Court wanted to seize and imprison him once again, then they had the power to do so. And perhaps at this point, Wukong had sussed out that the headband to control him was still invisibly attached to his head, or at any rate, could be easily replaced at a moment's notice. The only reason they didn't do these things was because they still had him under their control. Wukong then asked Boy to recall just how many of the powerful Yaoguais they'd met they'd actually killed. But aside from a few exceptions, like the Spider Sisters, he pointed out that most of them were instead taken by bodhisattvas and converted to Buddhism. After all, a dead Yaoguai may be a temporary problem solved, but a converted one? Now that's another power that the Buddhas can use to their advantage. Examples of which we've seen throughout the game. With every great Yaoguai we've encountered, simply a piece on the board for the Destined One to topple. And the more powerful followers they have, the more powerful the Buddha's realm will be, all serving as his tools and controlled by the system. Ultimately, the more followers they have in total, the more people they have under them. Thus, the more tribute to those at the top receive, and thus more powerful do they grow. Wukong effectively realizes that all he and Boy have succeeded in doing is rising to the top of a grand celestial pyramid scheme. And whilst they may now enjoy endless revelry, it comes at the expense of those left on the ground, which is ultimately the place that Wukong yearns to return to. Despite all his power and everything he has attained, all he now wants to do is return to his mountain, to play with the other monkeys and live a simple life. The last thing Boy hears him say before leaving is, "Immortality, it's not for me." Yet, it is specifically because of Wukong's immense power that the court will never again permit him to exist freely outside of their celestial realm. They come and kill his monkeys and level his mountain, i.e. the events at the start of the game. Wukong dies, and his relics are divided. After this, 4 of the Zodiac deities, Shen Monkey, Zudog, Qianlong, and Yin Tiger, who take residence in the Painted Realm in the game, are given the Painted Realm Scroll by none other than Erlang Shen. These 4 then become a core part of the plan for Wukong's resurrection, taking his armor back to Mount Huaguo before going their own separate ways, agreeing to reunite in the Painted Realm Scroll when the time is right and when the Destined One emerges, to aid him in each of their specialties along his journey. Shen Monkey with gourd drinks, Zudog with pill crafting, Qianlong with growing seeds, and finally Yin Tiger with the forging and improving of armor, as well as a nice repeatable sparring partner to test our skills on. Once the armor was returned to Mount Huaguo though, it took on some bizarre forms of varying giant Guais, reflecting not just the armor itself, but aspects of Wukong's own personality. His armor transformed into a golden rhino, mirroring his indomitable spirits, never giving up even when injured. His cloud treader boots then took on a deer form, reflecting both Wukong's agility and, when pressed, thinly veiled ferocity. The leaping fang-tail general, which is actually an entity unto itself, reflected the cleverness of Wukong, the ability to understand both himself and his enemies, and know when to ask for the help of others. This bug became the vessel for his crown. Then, the emerald-armed mantis reflected Wukong's ruthlessness and cunning cruelty. In fact, when we come to this range, it'll even employ Wukong's own attack from within the stomach trick, only this time on our friend Zhu Bajie. Finally, behind the waterfall in Wukong's original throne room, he also placed his Jinglebang, the size-changing staff that years ago he took from the Dragon King, each piece carefully placed around Mount Huaguo, awaiting retrieval by a worthy Destined One. Having been close with him during his youth, the Mandrill chief no doubt took the news of Wukong's death badly, but not long after, she was visited in a dream by an immortal, who explained that if she visited all sacred Buddhist areas and temples, she may find the essences of the 5 skandhas, those abstract notions that make up a person, yet in this instance, all made tangible. She's told with all 5 skandhas in place, she may yet craft a pill, powerful enough to reawaken the egg of the monkey that now once again sits atop Mount Huaguo. So, for the next 100 years or so, the Mandrill chief traveled the world, though sadly, never found a single skandha. Finally, the Destined One and Zhu Bajie return to Mount Huaguo, only to be met with a fair amount of resistance from soldiers of the court. Now, we have established already that this entire plot for Wukong's return was partially devised by the court itself, or at any rate, mandated by them. So why now then do they seek to hinder us? I think the answer possibly lies in the fact that the court itself is made up of many celestial beings. Not all of them necessarily agree on permitting Wukong's return, and given we once again are hindered by the Supreme Inspector, I would guess that these soldiers reflect the disagreement of this plan of the Jade Emperor himself, or possibly Lord Lao's, since we know the Inspector does do his bidding too. Though, with him out the way, and the power of the Somersault Cloud now having returned to us, being this close to Wukong with the relics, the Destined One is free to retrieve all of Wukong's gear by defeating the various vessels that house it. Also, however, through the cliffs, the Destined One can face down the remainder of Wukong's celestial stone. By gathering the other 4 Buddhist Skandhas ourselves across our travels and flying through this ridge, those 4 Skandhas, reunited with the 5th of consciousness on the Buddha head atop this stone Guai, will reawaken the giant Shigandang, who you may notice has similar veins of blue quartz as the Mother of Stones did. Indeed, both of these entities were said to have absorbed the essence of the moon in their early days, and thus it's probably the reason both of them grew this type of stone. But carefully defeating this mountain-sized rock Guai, an old friend was also watching from afar, and scrambling up the stone titan as she saw it fall to find the fleshy Buddha head, the Mandrill chief, after 100 years, has finally found one of the 5 Skandhas. Though, prizing it from the eye socket of the unimpressed Buddha head, she turns to see a monkey that looks exactly like Sun Wukong. And since her entire quest was undertaken in the first place specifically to get Wukong back, she can't help but laugh at the absurdity of such a thing. And with the help of Zudog, the Destined One does indeed craft the 5 Skandhas pill, imbuing them with additional power across various attributes. And whilst it may technically aid in Wukong's return, it does not, by itself at least, seem to reawaken the egg. But with that, and all Wukong's other gear retrieved, Wukong and Bajie are forced to fight their way to the top of Mount Huaguo. And by the way, these soldiers from the Celestial Court, they're actually formless spirits, forbidden from reincarnating ever again and grounded in place only by the form of their armor. If their armor is broken, then their soul scatters into the universe, and by the law of this game, they die. Like permanently, with no way of ever coming back. And the Celestial Court are just knowingly sending them down by their droves to get slaughtered. It goes to show just how little the deities of the court actually care for anything beyond themselves. Eventually, however, Wukong and Bajie reach the stone of Sun Wukong, and traveling inside are met with a familiar face.
You're here.
The old monkey, who sent us off on our journey to begin with and sent Bajie along too a while later, greets us again at our journey's end. Then, ferrying us across the water into the setting sun, he and Bajie have this big philosophical lore exposition debate dump, which, to be honest, without knowing the wider lore, you're probably just thinking enough talk, let's fight. But there are plenty of interesting bits of subtext to note here. Firstly, the old monkey takes several opportunities to berate Sun Wukong's more sinful tendencies, noting how he too reflects many of the vices of those we've previously fought against. Just like Jinchi and the Black Bear Guai, for example, Wukong coveted nice things. Much of his original gear, including the Jinglebang, was taken from others. Then, his boundless ambition and desire for more left him constantly ungrateful and unsatisfied. Even when granted a place at the Celestial Court, Wukong had the audacity to gorge himself on the 9,000-year peaches, only to later also fly into a rage when he wasn't invited to the actual feast. Similar to how the Yellowwind Sage continued to seek more Buddha heads and yet more power, never satisfied with what he had. And even after Wukong's 500-year imprisonment, he maintained a steadfast superiority to others, and would often indulge his whims as he saw fit. Sound familiar to someone? By the old monkey's reckoning, Wukong and Yellowbrow are not so unalike. And this next point of the old monkeys is worth taking a special note of.
Wait, isn't it that lady of some sort? It was her tricks that made Master drive Wukong away.
On White Tiger Ridge, he forsook his love. 3 times he broke her into pieces, convincing himself his heart would ache no more.
Yet, as you must know, he had never let go of her. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so eager to get away from the Buddhahood he attained. Those who talk much of love will one day bite their tongues.
Now, this is interesting, and the fact that it deviates from the original story. Originally, Lady Whitebow, who's that lady being talked about here, was a shape-shifting demon who tried 3 times to entrap Tang Sangzang through various disguises. Each one Wukong saw through, killing the woman 3 times. Tang Sangzang then banishes Wukong for this, believing that he'd just killed 3 innocent people. Though, from this scene in-game, it seems to set up a deeper romantic connection that the two shared, similar to Zhubaja and Violet Spider. Now, where did we see such a connection manifest itself in this game? Why, back in Chapter 4, between the Destined One and the 4th sister, who perhaps was in fact a reincarnated Lady Whitebone. Speculation, of course, at this point, but I have a feeling and a hope that we may get some DLC on that. But back to the boat ride again, the old monkey continues to rip apart Sun Wukong's entire life, going so far as to critique his desires at the last.
They yearn for freedom, yet aspire to Buddhahood. They always want both, yet nobody can and nobody should. Such was the folly of the Bull King and Wukong. Destiny's favor calls for the resolution to sever all desires. You should mark well these words.
So it sounds like he's effectively saying that in order to achieve the greater levels of power that Buddhism can offer, one has to sacrifice everything, including their own freedom, using their power only to aid the will of the heavens, lest they become imprisoned or killed. At this point in the boat trip, the old monkey points out that we only actually have 5 of the 6 relics. Wukong's mind is not here, and according to the old monkey, it never can be.
Mind is the first of the 6. It's the essence unique to every life. Therefore, it's destined to fade away at life's end.
Hold on. You mean Wukong's gone for good? Never to return? You old bastard! You've been lying to us all this time!
That Wukong you knew will never return. But what made him remains. The universe will always bear him a successor, one who shall carry on his name and nature. This chosen successor is the Destined One. Nameless you were, yet perils and mighty foes you've braved to recover his relics. Your will now stands resolute, worthy of his power.
A lot of standard Buddhist philosophy here on the nature of reincarnation, but through such philosophies, the old monkey is clearly seeking to convince us that we will only ever be Wukong's replacement. It's an idea, in fact, that was introduced back in Chapter 1 somewhat with the Lingjusi wolves, where the second wolf took the same name in an attempt to garner more loyalty from those who served the first. The idea here being that whilst we can take Wukong's things, Wukong's power, and even his name, his memories faded when he died, at least according to the old monkey.
You mean this boy is to take Wukong's name? He's not!
Sun Wukong is long gone!
But deep down, you know he wasn't all that perfect. Now that he is dead, this one, perhaps, shall bear the name in his stead.
Basically saying, no, you can't retrieve the mind relic, so don't even try. And besides, why would you want to? Look at how conniving that monkey mind ultimately was. You, Destined One, have the potential to be so much more. All of Wukong's power, but obedient and outrightly good. But before we can fully assume the role of Wukong, there's one small matter left to attend to. For within this stone, now bereft of all 6 relics, Wukong's bodily shell still remains.
If you truly are the one destined, you must cast aside his soulless shell and merge the 6 into one. Then you shall be the one to begin the journey anew.
And as we approach the stone vessel of the former great sage equal to heaven, Baja, whether he knows it or not, actually gives some really sound advice if we've taken this route in the game.
Hear me, son! You can always run! You don't have to bear Wukong's name!
We'll come back to why in just a moment, but first, let's beat the hell out of this stone monkey a couple times for one of the most epic boss reveals ever. Then, fighting the true broken shell of the Great Sage, the Destined One is eventually stripped of all the relics they've acquired as they return to the body of their former master, giving him back even those fiery golden eyes, which were tempered in Lord Lao's furnace. It's actually kind of crazy, in fact, that the Destined One even has a hope of beating Wukong by this point, and I can only imagine that the broken shell must have been holding back a little, offering still a great challenge for a true Destined One, but not an impossible task. After all, when finally lying defeated, Sun Wukong, or the Great Sage's broken shell, lets out an elated laugh as the relics return to us and his body disintegrates. The encaging band on his head falls into the water as his power finally flows into a body that can be free. Except in this case, what Wukong wanted, his freedom, it doesn't matter. And without Wukong's mind and memories, the Destined One is none the wiser. The only wisdom he does have at this point is that of the old monkey, who tore apart Wukong's misdeeds and insisted that we could become his successor in name only. We, the Destined One, an impressionable but very skilled youth who only took this path at all because the old monkey inspired us to. So, when he does place the encaging band back atop our head, forcing this body forever to become the obedient servant of the celestial court, what more could we do but bow, replacing the body of Sun Wukong to be born anew as his less temperamental successor. This is obviously the bad ending, and only made all the more clear after understanding the wider political law that underpins this whole story. But at least it's clear now just why the gods permitted this thing to happen. For the old monkey to keep sending Destined Ones after Wukong's relics, to deliver them a being with the power of Wukong that they are able to control. Evidently, this old monkey was a servant of the court this whole time. And there's a few teases, in fact, within the old monkey's lore entry that might give us some hints as to who he is. Some say the old monkey is Bodhisattva Guanyin. Some say he is Patriarch Bodhi, Wukong's original tutor. Some say he is Sun Wukong himself. We are not the first Destined One he's sent on this journey, and like I said a couple hours ago now at the start of the video, the game has this wonderful cyclical nature going on. Ultimately, everything comes around again. Every time he sends out a new Destined One, the immortals of the Celestial Court say he is gambling, that gambling will inevitably lead to loss. Though the old monkey says that he neither gambles nor loses. He is just waiting for the stories the Destined Ones will tell him upon their return, and he has never heard the same story twice. Each Destined One that he sends away, that returns to defeat the stone monkey, only perpetuates this endless loop. Only, of course, there is a way for the old monkey to lose, for the loop to be broken. After all, not all the immortals at the court think the same, and there are still a few amongst them loyal to Sun Wukong, though I don't imagine any of them would have expected Sun Wukong's true return to come at the hands of Erlang Shen. The secret to Wukong's true freedom lies back in Chapter 3, at the New West, and the brother Erlang sent to test us there, the green-capped martialist. After we defeat him and pass the test, the Destined One has a brief extra encounter with Maitreya, where it's strongly hinted at where Erlang Shen is hiding.
An old friend of Sun Wukong came to me, wanting some peace. I led him to the Great Pagoda. Have you paid him a visit? They say you are the Destined One. But if destiny is set, what difference do our actions make?
The Great Pagoda, not to be confused with the confounding pagoda realm nearby, is hidden in the snowy wastes of the New West. In fact, all the murals we see at the end of each chapter wind up on the walls here, and only once they're all complete, and once we've passed each secret trial for all of Erlang's brothers, will the way be opened to us. Visiting now, Maitreya explains that for a long time, Erlang has been waiting for us.
Long has an old friend waited for you. Destiny ripens. This last mural holds the key. Go forth. No one sees this myth more clearly than him.
And thus, a plot within a plot begins to unravel. And making our way to the summit of the painted Maijian Peak, Erlang Shen is awaiting to enact the final part of the secret plot. And immediately, he reveals a fact which in turn reveals the truth.
I can't kill that monkey. No one can. Except himself. But at last, I see. This is the only way. He had no choice, and neither did I.
I mean, it's fairly obvious when you think about it. Wukong was nigh on unkillable before the journey, so after it, having ascended to Buddhahood, it only makes sense that nobody would have the power to end his life save for himself. So jumping back to this animated cutscene, and that is exactly what Wukong did. Just like Red Boy, he knew that the only way to truly escape the binds of the Celestial Court was in ending his own life. And on the surface, Erlang seemed only all too happy that the only other being in the court who could match him in a challenge was now no more. But in truth, at this point, Erlang finally saw him as more than just the troublesome monkey he'd first met. He was now a being ascended to Buddhahood, who'd faced 81 trials to prove his loyalty to the Buddha and earn his freedom. Yet, even then, even after all of that, the court still feared his power. So Wukong hatched his own plot, and Erlang agreed to be a part of it. But if Erlang wanted to help Wukong, he first had to help in destroying him. The giving of that armor to Yin Tiger, of course, carved the path for the worthy Destined Ones to wear it, and the warning to the Bull King at his last was simply a kindness to his sworn brother. Small pieces, really, of a much greater whole. The true genius was in the division of the 6 relics. We know who took the first 5, and the old monkey would have us believe that the mind died with Wukong, a notion that fittingly aligns with a lot of philosophies behind Buddhism. And given that the old monkey is clearly an acolyte of the Buddhas, that does make total sense. But in this case, it was a lie. In fact, Erlang Shen himself took Wukong's mind and hid it inside his third eye. But the scores of celestial soldiers who fought on the front lines against Wukong at his last also saw this happen. So, with the battle over, Erlang sent them down to Mount Huaguo to finish off any wounded monkeys. This gave Erlang the excuse to subtly kill off all of those witnesses and spread the belief that Wukong's mind was lost. Outwardly, he presented himself as the monkey's sworn enemy, a very believable cover to ensure nobody suspected he was actually secretly helping him. Then he sent his 5 brothers to test the skill of the Destined Ones. But since Wukong and Erlang could successfully go toe-to-toe back in the day, it stands to reason that Wukong, at full power, could defeat Erlang Shen. Thus, we are faced with our greatest challenge yet. And at first, Erlang goes easy, giving us a chance to prove what we're made of.
You do have some of his spark. That's it. I won't hold back from now. Let's fight!
And if you listen carefully, despite the difficulty this, 8-minute fight entails, everything Erlang says here speaks either to testing us or praising Wukong.
You've lifted my spirits, monkey. When he was dragged to the execution yard, sword and spear were dulled, cleaver and cudgel crumbled, and yet he emerged unscathed. Yet he gave his life to put you in this place. Let me see what power diverges from his.
In fact, despite Wukong proving Erlang Shen's only rival, the sacred divinity actually liked this about him. After all, what is eternity with no sense of challenge?
Chosen celestial race, Many of them are below, and few are like. Back when he was around, he was the one rival I relished.
So perhaps part of Erlang's agreement in helping Wukong to return actually stems for his own desire for some more equal combat.
I was just wondering, is our fight part of his plan?
Now remember that the Bull King, when he got really mad, turned into a giant bull? Well, defeating Erlang initially, the two both then turn into giant beasts. At which point, Erlang realizes we truly must be the Destined One, for none other could push him into this. Once we have transformed into two titanic beasts though, this apparently summons the attention of the four Heavenly Kings from the cutscene at the start of the game, whom we then also defeat. Though do remember, all of this is taking place inside of a painting, another painted realm, if you will. So whether or not these are indeed the four true Heavenly Kings, or just fabricated machinations of Erlang's, isn't fully clear. But I would wager that killing four celestial deities such as this for real should realistically prompt a more severe reaction from the course afterwards. But I suppose we'll just have to guess whether they are truly the four Heavenly Kings for now. Though defeating them does prove our worth to Erlang all the more, who resorts to see it through himself with one final test of combat, a fight which pushes us to tap into even more of our raw celestial power, and which ends with this incredibly awesome move. Having defeated Erlang, he finally reveals the sixth relic contained within his third eye as snippets of Wukong's memories pour forth.
Watch me rip it off and break free!
The win is his. My brothers tested you at my behest. All for this day. And only now do I understand that fight. No prestige can shackle him. No band can keep him caged. A mortal death for an unbound mind and will. May you not fail him. I'm now at peace. Your journey, though, has just begun.
Erlang realized, I think, that when Wukong said he'd rip off his headband and break free, that his method of doing so was actually going to be a lot more intricate than it first sounded. He would die, a successor would rise up and take his power and his place, mowing down the Yaoguais that took his relics, and all the while the court would watch and wait, expecting at the end to get a new, more obedient and subjugated Wukong, and not realizing that all along his mind too still lived. But just as Wukong's body weakened that of the Bull King, his mind too, housed inside that of Erlang's, created an inner turmoil for the sacred divinity, testing his heart greatly. Luckily, he wasn't the only one that wanted to help Wukong in his slow victory. Maitreya, too, had a vested interest in Wukong attaining freedom, originally opening the path to this place for Erlang to wait it out, away from the eyes or influence of the court. Now, quite why Maitreya wanted this too isn't entirely clear. Indeed, he does seem a more humble and caring soul than most, so perhaps simply understood Wukong's desire for a simpler life. Or perhaps, as the Buddha of the future, his interest ultimately lies in bringing about the end of the current form of Buddhism. And if the present Buddhas were to have an incredibly powerful monkey still on side, their existence would no doubt only be prolonged further. Ultimately though, the truth is unclear, and we'll just have to speculate. But now, with Wukong's mind too, defeating meeting the Great Sage's broken shell again goes more or less the same, only differing in the moments before the old monkey replaces the encaging band on our heads, where this time our eyes open, now with Wukong's golden glow, and with a flash, his memories all return in reverse. From the moment he threatens to rip off the headband, right back to a final toast with his sworn brothers the night before he crashed the Celestial Palace. In this ending, it's clear that Wukong really has returned. The Great Sage and all of his memories now in the free body of the Destined One. Though, what isn't clear is what happens after this, as chronologically, the Destined One's golden eyes are the last thing we see, leaving several things unanswered. For instance, Wukong may now be awake and free, but the old monkey is still only inches away with the encaging headband. Is he still going to attempt to replace it, or will he not, now that the true Destined One, who's seen out all the challenges, has finally shown himself? I mean, he seemed pretty resolute during that boat trip.
Soon Wukong is long gone!
So I'm gonna wager Wukong's got an immediate fight on his hands. And I mean, truly, who actually knows the extent of this guy's power? After all, it's hinted that he may even be the guy that trained Wukong in the first place. And even if Wukong does escape, then what's to stop the Celestial Court coming after him still? Even if he hides, is he still going to spend his life in fear that a heavenly host might kill anyone close to him? Speaking of which, there's still the matter of the court having hold over the pillified fourth sister, who may also be a reincarnated Lady Whitebone, and whom the old monkey even implied to be the real reason Wukong wanted to escape from Buddhahood. Though now if he wants to be with her, he'll first have to wage a war against the heavens and, you know, go save her. Further to all of this is the question of what exactly Bajie will do now. As an outcast of the court still, will he remain following Sun Wukong? And just whereabouts are Tan Sanzang and Sha Wujing? The only mention we actually heard of them was like one line from Yellowbrow about how they'd retreated into the shadows. And beyond the interpersonal stories even, there's still the ongoing political feuds of the court itself. The Buddhists and Taoists, the Jade Emperor, Lord Lao, and plenty more. So suffice it to say that Game Science have a huge deal more of the original stories to pull from, and have established here a fantastic world for a dark sequel to this ancient tale. A black myth, if you will. But with that, I think we've just about covered all there is to cover on the main bosses of Black Myth Wukong. Now, I really didn't expect that this video would turn out to be near enough to 3 hours when I started. I thought half that at best, but really, the runtime is simply testament to the crazy amounts of interconnected lore both across the 200 journal entries, the 6 animated cutscenes, and of course, the many interactions and secrets across the world itself. It really was a pleasure to piece this all together, and I hope by now you have a pretty good understanding not just of the main bosses, but like ideally the entire game. Because in truth, there's just no explaining those core boss fights without delving into the full context around them. Again, if you're looking for a new PC to enjoy this game in its full glory, then again, do go check out Apex. They have some great deals, including my code SAM for 10% off. Or in fact, if you apply the code WeLoveOurPartners before the 30th of September, then you'll actually get 20% off. So that's definitely worth checking out. Thank you also to my patrons for keeping the channel going and supporting me to create some sometimes truly insane projects like this one. Please do feel free to share your thoughts on any and all of the discussed lore of this video in the comments, and I've no doubt there's even more lore out there to enhance our appreciation of this story even further, and maybe you can be the one to share that. There's also my Discord server if you prefer to chat there. Finally, of course, thank you for watching. I'm Sam Bram, and I think I'm gonna go and touch some grass now. And I don't mean Unreal Engine 5 grass, I mean the real good stuff. See you in the next one.